with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, January 13th, 2021. 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Rachel Greenwald Smith, author of On Compromise, Art, Politics, and the Fate of the American Ideal. Meanwhile, the Omicron wave has appeared to slow down just a bit in New York City and other areas of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, which is a promising sign that we could be peaking and seeing a steep drop-off like the UK is currently seeing. But still get your booster and mask up, which might become easier. Smooth transition. If Bernie Sanders' new legislation passes, Sanders and 50 other Democratic lawmakers have introduced a bill that would send 3 N95 masks to all Americans via the USPS. Seems like common sense, and honestly, we probably should have done that.
Welcome
really
to modernity.
Yep. But globally, Omicron is still wreaking havoc, especially in places where the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are still rare. The WHO estimates that there were 15 million new COVID infections just last week. In January 6th committee news, Kayleigh McEnany was interviewed yesterday, while top House Republican Kevin McCarthy has announced he will not cooperate. It was a voluntary thing, so we'll see if they try to force him. Speaking of people not cooperating, Biden is having a lunch meeting with Senate Democrats today in order to push Sinema and Manchin to support a filibuster carve-out for voting rights. Good luck after you let Manchin kill Build Back Better. He's feeling himself. The Ohio Supreme Court has struck down Republicans' heavy gerrymandered state map, which would have maintained GOP control of the State House. They now have 10 days to submit a new map. And lastly, an 80-year-old Palestinian-American man named Omar Abdulmajid Assad was killed and died, allegedly killed by the IDF in the occupied West Bank. He was found dead and handcuffed in an abandoned building after a police interaction. So yet another reminder about the power dynamics at play there. It's not two sides, it's one dominant actor. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Majority Report. Sam is out today on Thursdays, but we do have a great show for you today. When the cat's away, the mice play.
Sam is a giant cat.
Yeah. I don't know if he'd like to be compared to a cat, given the disdain he has for his own cats. He loves them secretly, but...
Yeah, well, he does a lot for him, so I think that's love.
Yes, exactly. They have illnesses. So, as... I'm hopeful that we've seen the worst of Omicron right now. Obviously, Matt, you've had to experience COVID. It's been all over the place throughout the city. More than half of my friends, I feel like, contracted it in December. But I'm seeing just anecdotally lines outside these mobile testing.
Well, the capacity is there now. It's interesting. Yeah. Like, I'm seeing a lot more testing sites, but I mean, a lot less quality, as we kind of alluded to yesterday.
Yes.
Like, it seems like people just got like tents and they're like sitting with clipboards. I don't quite understand the professionality, but that's how we do it in America. We do it late, but for profit.
Yeah, I walked past one of the testing sites the other day, and there was no line, and I asked, and they said actually it would take 2 to 3 days, but I had an appointment to get one that would have taken a shorter period of time. But the font was like bolded Comic Sans, and like there was no branding on the sign, and I'm just like, is this one of the fake COVID testing sites that we covered yesterday? There's no way to know.
And they're trying to like get you to take it just walking past, get anybody to go get a COVID test, which I guess I kind of like is fine, but you understand what the motivation is. It's because they're getting kickbacks for every test that they do. Yeah,
and another just quick anecdote, when I was waiting for a test a few weeks ago, someone was there clearly from Europe, and he did not have an insurance card because he assumed, and had waited in line with me for like 2.5 hours. And he gets to the counter, and she's like, well, $150. So that's what we're dealing with. And I think
a lesson for America for your friend.
Yeah, he was just somebody I met in line, but he needed it to get back home. So it's absurd. But speaking of COVID, the Republicans continue to dabble in anti-vax misinformation, except for really one. I mean, for now, this is the guy that said maybe you should inject bleach into your body. Maybe you should put a UV light in your lungs. I don't know. Maybe that'll fix COVID.
Yeah, this is a relatively pro-vax guy, or good medical information guy, even with all that said, compared to most Republicans.
Exactly. Yeah, because then once the vaccine arrived, he wanted to take credit for it. Donald Trump. It sounds crazy, but if he runs in 2024, he will be the most pro-vaccine legitimate contender for the Republican nomination.
And what's so good about Trump, and kind of what's evident here, is he's not thirsty for the fans as much. Like, he has a little bit of disdain, right? He's leaving them in the cold in like Omaha, going to rallies and stuff during coronavirus.
Yes.
But and the other ones are thirsty for them, so they can't really turn away from this sort of anti-vaxxery. Trump has the independence because he doesn't really care about these people.
Well, as you say, he has disdain for the evangelical base that's at the heart of this anti-vax movement, the people that he thinks are behaving irrationally and are not the kinds he wants the adoration, but he really finds them to be a bit grimy. So I did not think that we would be saying that Donald Trump, of the actual people that could win the Republican nomination in 2024, would be the most pro-vax, but he is. And part of this is self-interest. He wants to take credit for the vaccine, and also because he has no patience for this garbage. Where, as Matt says, someone like DeSantis, who he uses this opportunity to take a not so subtle shot at here, he has to engage in that. So here he is speaking to OAN, where he does take a not so subtle shot at DeSantis, because DeSantis may be cosplaying, as Trump. He may be the
doing my hand motions.
Yeah, right. I mean, watch that side by side. The DeSantis is trying to copy him. So he's the carbon copy, but there's nothing like the real deal, the real, pure stuff. Here's Trump on OAN.
We'll get to in a second, but the other one was the vaccine. Right. You recently stated in an interview with Candace Owens, and when you were on the road with Bill O'Reilly doing the book tour and the speaking engagement, that you've had the vaccine, 2 shots, and you've had the booster. Right. And you recommend it for folks. We have seen with the VAERS report, there's tens of thousands of side effects, more side effects in this vax than any vaccine history.
And more deaths.
Dr. Robert Malone.
There is no VAERS report. Yeah. VAERS is a site where people can, and there's no vetting process. Any anti-vaxxer who claims that the vaccine, made them radioactive or magnetic, they can post on this VAERS aggregating data website. There's no report. It's just a place where you can file a complaint and say, hey, I experienced these symptoms from whatever, and it's compiled there, and there's no.
And then you try to find patterns if there is some that exists. But yeah, the thing that there's so much with VAERS with the COVID vaccines, and not for say like other vaccinations, is because the COVID vaccine is the entire population at the same time, and also politicized by a political party. So there's a whole lot more awareness that like maybe this, like people get paranoid in this environment.
Yes.
Right? And there is a limited number of things where people will have some like some reaction to the vaccines, but the VAERS reports are like absolutely like I could go on there and say like the vaccine made me fly to work and now I can't walk anymore, and it'd be like, oh, look at that, that's something we need to look into. Like, let's ask
the VAERS report.
Yeah, exactly. Look at the VAERS report.
They said it. Wow. Yeah. All right, but continue.
9 patents for the mRNA technology being used in the vaccines. He came on my program a couple weeks ago and said, unless you're over 65 and have a comorbidity, I recommend it. Other than that, I don't recommend taking it. He even is upset he took it himself. He's having heart issues. Looking back, we know that Warp Speed was great. You did amazing with getting rid of red tape to get something out there.
I'm sorry.
But after now so many...
Go back to Donald Trump just staring at him, and he's just like, how am I letting this guy speak for this long without me interrupting?
Excuse me. You say heart issues. I'll have you know that myocarditis happens even more frequently with coronavirus itself. So that might have happened. And also, yeah, like myocarditis, it does happen. It can be an impact from things like the common cold. So you know what? Stop fear-mongering.
Yeah, I love, I want there to be a new character, epidemiologist Trump. Okay, but he is so bored. He has not been able to talk for a full 30 seconds. Keep going.
Looking back, we know that Warp Speed was great. You did amazing with getting rid of red tape to get something out there. But after now so many months of the vaccine being administered and these side effects and Americans' questions of it, do you reconsider your push for it, or what's your view now on the vaccine in general?
Well, I've taken it. I've had the booster. Many politicians, I watched a couple of politicians be interviewed, and one of the questions was, did you get the booster? Because they had the vaccine. And they're answering it like, in other words, the answer is yes, but they don't want to say it. Because they're gutless. You got to say it. Whether you had it or not, say it. Right. But the fact is that I think the vaccine has saved tens of millions of people throughout the world. I have had absolutely no side effects. I've had it like other people have had it, nothing special. I've had it.
Do you feel for the millions of Americans that have it, though? There's over 100 million that haven't taken it yet, and they have questions, especially younger people with the myocarditis and things.
I don't think young, healthy people should take it. Okay. I don't think that, certainly these young kids, their immune system is so strong. I look at I have a son, Barron,
so
who's 15.
Where,
he had it. It lasted for about 2 seconds, okay? I said, oh, we've got it. Barron, you've got it. And like by the time we called the doctor, it was gone. You know, they have a very strong immune system.
Right. By the time we called the doctor, I was gone. I said, oh, Barron, you've got it. Bye-bye. No more attention paid to you.
But you see how, like, the way Trump, like, Trump's way, like, there's nothing, like, people say they're criticizing pharma by being against these vaccines. But at the same time, Trump is right when he says, like, this could save tens of millions of people. It'd save even more if we could all be sort of united in saying, hey, we need to extend this technology worldwide and the knowledge to how to produce it. But when you say, like, actually there's a lot of people everywhere from OAN to Jimmy Dore has questions about, like, is this actually, like, some sort of conspiracy of pharma? Then that question about extending it to the rest of the world isn't one you would ask, because why would you want to extend the conspiracy to them too?
Exactly. But it is just fascinating here whenever Trump sees an opportunity to be the alpha, that will take precedence over any of this, like, culture war vaccine stuff that he feels is silly and doesn't necessarily want to engage in. He sees an opportunity here to be like, DeSantis is a loser. He's not, just admit it like I did. I'm the one telling you the truth. And then you're kind of like at a throwback to 2015, 2016, where that was his whole aesthetic to the Republicans. I'm saying the real stuff. I'm not pandering to you, and I'm saying exactly what you are thinking.
Yeah, and also the idea that only people that are old, like these are probabilities, but you can really help your or really get rid of the risk that you have of being hospitalized by getting the vaccine. So
Yes.
even young people, even kids should be vaccinated.
Exactly. And that's not what they're thinking with the vaccine. I just meant back in 2015, 2016 when he was saying the racist stuff. But that paired with his just like big dogging of the rest of the Republican nominees on stage, that's what got him the nomination. And he's already starting there with DeSantis. Why are you so scared? Why are you a liar? It's effective. And I'm the one who took it, and I'm the one that created it. So
Stop fear-mongering about myocarditis.
just a reminder that he's good at this stuff with the base. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be joined by Rachel Greenwald Smith, author of On Compromise, Art, Politics, and the Fate of the American Ideal. We are back, and we are joined by Rachel Greenwald Smith, author of On Compromise, Art, Politics, and the Fate of an American Ideal. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk about your book because I think the concept of as a leftist, when I hear compromise, it makes my blood boil, right? But in many ways, Biden really ran and won as a compromise candidate, right? I am the unity candidate. I am against divisiveness, and I'll bring people together, which really means I will compromise with the Republicans, who are vile, and I will give them part of what they want. And that makes me want to vomit everywhere. But there is a literacy in this country where people find that appealing, or I guess a muscle memory, I should say. So why is that message so potent to many Americans?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, one of the answers I give in my book is that compromise has become something more than a practice that we engage in. It's become a sort of ethos or a moral attitude that we have come to sort of appreciate without thinking very hard about what compromise actually entails. So early in the book, I make a distinction between compromise as a means and compromise as an end. And when I talk about compromise as a means, what I mean is what most of us do every day in our workplaces and homes, where we engage in conflict and have to really work out hard with other people how we can get along despite our disagreements. And when we make those compromises, we usually don't enjoy them. They usually entail a certain amount of loss, a certain amount of anger, maybe some resentment, maybe some hopes that things will get better or that we'll get our own way eventually. And I contrast that notion of compromise as a means with what I think you're talking about and what I think Biden ran on, which is the compromise as an end. The idea that compromise is a good into itself, something we should aspire to, something we should want, and that people who are good compromisers are both morally and politically preferable to those who aren't.
Right. And something you brought up in your book, which I never thought about this way and was just so well said on the individual level, which you mentioned, compromise can seem like a way to inure regular people to the harshest consequences of capitalism as well. Talk a little bit about that concept.
Sure. So, I mean, capitalism demands compromise in a really brutal way on a number of levels. It turns those of us who don't agree with exploitation into exploiters, kind of by necessity, as we buy products that are made through process of exploitation and as we are ourselves exploited as workers. And it makes the compromises that we have to make in order to share resources harder, because it drives scarcity by concentrating resources at the top and making the rest of us scramble for what is left. So compromise and capitalism to me are very much tangled up. And I think as a result, valuing compromise ends up turning around and often encouraging us to sort of implicitly accept the conditions that capitalism has given us when we really should be fighting against them.
And is that by, I mean, that seems to be by design. It allows people to, you know, we've been talking a lot about the GOP's push for critical race theory and how that allows, it's basically designed to not just make our children not question our systems, but make them idealize them. And if you're also conditioning people to be good compromisers in relation to power structures, that seems to have a similar effect of protecting a class of people.
I think that's right. And I think sometimes it's by design and sometimes it's sort of a matter of just accepting things as they are and not pushing back very hard. So, I mean, for me, the particular way that compromise is functioning in our current moment politically on the left starts with the Clinton administration in the 1990s and the sort of acceptance of neoliberalization that we saw under that administration. So it was with the turn to Clinton era Democratic politics here, I mean, and this was tracking, of course, abroad in the Tony Blair administration and elsewhere, we start to see the left give up on sort of socialist valences of thinking about redistributing wealth, of critiquing capitalism in any meaningful way. And it's exactly at that point where we start to see the language of centrism, of third ways, and of compromise really take hold in the Democratic Party.
Right. I mean, including a think tank called Third Way.
Yes.
They should have just called it compromise or something like that. But I mean, like, that is another thing that you wrote about that I thought was really just well said. The how compromise became an inherent, or is an inherent value in liberalism, which I guess you can kind of more broadly talk about it as a value, or not more broadly, but you can point to it as a value of neoliberalism, certainly as well. What did you mean by that?
By liberalism, or
by how compromise was inherent to liberalism?
Yeah, I mean, liberalism, of course, has so many definitions, like the sort of fuzzy target. And one of the reasons why I'm interested in taking on sort of liberalism as a whole in a book about compromise is that when one tries to sort of combat liberalism as a logic, one immediately seems like a nasty extremist who's likely to be in bed with all sorts of people one doesn't want to be in bed with. Because liberalism entails not only values of freedom and liberty, of course, but also values of moderation, rational discourse, things that most of us would like to believe in. So I think I take on liberalism in two different ways in the book. On one hand, I take on compromise as a central liberal value, because it is something we're taught to do as good liberal subjects when we engage in negotiations, is to compromise. But also in saying that I think there's a role for forms of discourse that are not compromising, I'm bringing in an opportunity to take on values like liberalism that I think require a sort of more strident approach.
And how do you draw a distinction between, say, liberalism and your perception of progressivism or leftism? Because I think our power structures would say that's orthodoxy, as opposed to morality.
Yeah, so my definition of liberalism as opposed to sort of the politics I'm embracing, I suppose, for me, since my background is in art and literature, I sort of start, maybe counterintuitively, especially for your audience, which are probably mostly people more politically savvy than I am, but I start looking at the arts and the distinction between works of art that take these very strong stands, avant-gardist and experimental works that really try to challenge people, as opposed to works of art that sort of play to the market, that play to your average reader, that sort of aim themselves at larger audiences. And I think I see something analogous in political sensibilities. So yes, we have these really clear, I think, partisan divides within the left, even between, say, the Bernie Sanders social democracy contingent and the sort of more centrist Biden contingent, for instance. But I think that those are policy differences, and they're very, and I feel very strongly on the left of that spectrum myself in terms of my own politics. But there are also, I think, attitudinal differences between those two positions. And those are where I think seeing the analogous relationship to art is very instructive, in the sense that I think there's as much, in some ways, a sort of aesthetic difference between certain forms of leftism and others as there is a policy difference. And you hear the sort of attitude policing all the time from the center toward the left. It's not so much that they say, like, you shouldn't have a $15 minimum wage. It's sort of, it's much more commonly, well, you're not being patient, you're not waiting for incrementalism to do its work, you're asking too much, you're being too loud. And it's those kind of aesthetic properties of the political disagreement that I think are really revealed by looking at these things in relation to similar trends in works of art.
Well, so then let's talk a little bit about the you mentioned the avant-garde art from the 20th century that you focus on as well. What were some of the things, based on your background in art, that you found closely parallel a lot of these political dynamics?
Sure. So one of the figures I look at is an avant-gardist publisher, Margaret Anderson, who is the publisher of what was called at the time a little magazine, which were, maybe the blogs of the 19 teens. And she published a lot of early works of modernism. She was the first person to publish James Joyce's Ulysses in a serial format, for instance. And she was herself a very uncompromising figure. She, at one point, I write about how she so objected to the sort of mediocre quality of the work that she herself was publishing, that she said if she didn't have a really great piece for her next issue, she would leave blank pages in the issue, and she did, because she just refused to publish things she didn't think were extremely wonderful. She also slept in a tent on the edge of Lake Michigan for a while because she was kicked out of her offices because she couldn't afford her rent. So I'm interested in her sort of wonderful, uncompromising attitude as a woman, as a feminist, and as a publisher. But also, she had this incredible column in her magazine called The Reader Critic, where she would allow individual readers from all over the country to write in. And often the things that they wrote were actually quite either hostile or critical of the work that she was publishing. And she would write back to them in the column, where she would defend her choices or admit that she was wrong. And I argue in the book that that model is maybe a much better model for what democracy can look like than the notion that we all need to get along, or that there needs to be some sort of general consensus about what we need to do to go forward. That the sort of combative public space that she opens up around a conversation about art is something that we should also be looking for in our politics.
And another example as well is the punk scene that you talk about, which is another. We had Jason from the This Is Revolution podcast on, and to talk about a lot of the punk scene and like much of the same relationship with art that you're fleshing out here. But I'm curious about your take on it. What are some of the lessons gleaned from the punk scene about not selling out or not compromising, as you say, that can be also reflected back onto the political spectrum?
Sure. I mean, punk's really complicated because it's not at all politically stable. And a lot of the examples I look at of art that's sort of uncompromising are works that don't take maybe exactly the political position that some of us would want them to take. And I think that too is instructive. So I look at punk as a sort of ethos of refusal that can give us a lot of hope for what refusal can look like, but also has some cautionary aspects. So one of the things I do talk about is Gavin McInnes, the Proud Boys leader and Vice Media founder, his own background in punk and how we should be aware of the fact that punk has its own sort of entanglements with the far right. But on the other hand, I talk about Kathleen Hanna, the lead singer of Bikini Kill, very important feminist punk band from the 1990s, and her struggle to think politically about how she wanted her art movement to move forward. I find her to be a really useful figure because she was working very hard to make her movement as inclusive as possible. But in the process of trying to include everyone, she still ended up with a movement that was primarily white, middle class, suburban. And so I'm thinking in that chapter in which I think about Riot Grrrl, about how in some ways structure can sometimes lead to more inclusive political structures than sort of open season kind of anything goes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm such a dork and I don't know anything about punk. So like, I mean, but what it does remind me of a little bit is like the juxtaposition of the grunge movement of the 90s versus the glam, the glam rock, where I can't even think of one band. Guns N' Roses, would they be included in that? See, this
T-Rex is more glam.
Okay, sure. But I mean, that seems like a similar contrast.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the contrast that I'm interested in within punk has to do with thinking about different ways that movements that want to refuse the mainstream go about doing it. And in the case of Riot Grrrl, they were really interested in what it would mean to kind of get rid of hierarchy altogether, because they were so upset by the way that women were being treated at punk shows by male punk musicians and punk bands, and they felt that that was a result of a sort of hierarchical masculinist tendency in male punk bands. And so they thought if they removed hierarchy, that they would have this wonderful feminist collective that could just do anything. And they had that one of their slogans was revolutionary girl power now. You know, they really, which is very inspiring. However, you know, I write about my own experience growing up in Portland, Oregon during the 1990s, and I was a little bit younger than most of the people who were really involved in the movement, trying to find them. Like, I desperately wanted to be part of this movement, but because there wasn't any sort of structure, there wasn't any sort of intention behind recruiting people, behind being visible, even someone like me with the advantages that I had couldn't actually figure out how to join a meeting. So in that, you know, what I'm sort of asking for in that chapter in which I think about that part of punk is like, well, what if we could take the punk ethos of refusal, the punk interest in inclusivity and in rejection of all of the things that are brutal and terrible in our lives, but structure it in such a way that it could be accessible to more people.
Right. And you also, just what's great about your book too is you incorporate so much of your personal experience into the fluidity of these concepts and how they just branch out into different areas of life. And you open with the 2017 Women's March. You know, I was there too. It's a moment of catharsis, but what did you think it said about the concept of compromise and also resistance to the Trump administration at the time, and where we were culturally on those topics?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be kind to my former self in that chapter, which is in the introduction. I talk about going to that march and how at the time I felt very conflicted about it. And I still do feel conflicted about it. I think, you know, one of the reasons I felt conflicted about it is that I felt both absolutely drawn to be there because it did feel like this moment of crisis, and I felt in need of that feeling of catharsis that a large mass march would offer. But I also felt conflicted partly because of the, you know, well-publicized problems with the original organization of the march and how, you know, how dominated it was by white feminists. That changed, of course, as the Planning Commission went on. And also just because huge organized mass marches are not, in my opinion, necessarily the most useful political tactics, even if they do feel cathartic at the time. I don't know if you noticed this, but there was a lot of high-fiving of police officers and things like that at the Women's March that is not sort of...
Block that out from my memory just from...
But in that chapter, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is sort of, this is what compromise feels like, right? It feels like going to the march even when you have reservations, and that's fine. You know, this is something we all do all the time, but should we celebrate them, justify them, and say it's the very best thing? So for me, there's a big difference between saying, yeah, I went to the Women's March, I had conflicting feelings about it, I did find it meaningful in certain ways, and I found it disturbing in others. Rather, that's one way of talking about it. It's the way I prefer to talk about it. But I think many people in the Democratic Party will just say, the Women's March was wonderful. It was an incredibly meaningful form of political resistance. And if you say, well, then all of a sudden you're pushed off into this sort of extremist corner in which you're potentially a party traitor or not supporting feminism or a number of other things that I think can get thrown at people on the left side of the Democratic Party.
So it's interesting, too, that the pro-compromise faction is very uninterested in nuance when, you know, in theory, that should be inherent.
I think that's really true. And I think we see that really strongly right now with Joe Manchin as like the sort of poster boy of negotiate with me, where, you know, the most obstructionist person is the person who's claiming to be the moderate. And it's astonishing that the mainstream news media still calls him a moderate. Every time I hear that, I'm just like, yeah, it makes me feel frustrated.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to talk a little bit and dive into your chapter on how compromise helped cement and elongate in many ways anti-Blackness in America, because you use a lot of historic examples that I think are really necessary when we're talking about this current political moment. Talk a little bit about that if you could.
Sure. I mean, one of the most striking things that happened while I was writing this book, again, because I'm trained as an art and literature professor and not as a historian or a political scientist, is that I decided very early on that I wanted to write a book called The Missouri Compromise because I live in St. Louis and I am interested in the racial politics of this city and how it, you know, how it is a sort of test case for the rest of the country in many ways. But when I started thinking and reading about the Missouri Compromise, it became very clear to me that all of the compromises that I had learned about, as you know, in history classes throughout my entire education, were all made to basically sell out the interests of Black people for the purposes of maintaining peace for white people. So that starts with the 3/5 Compromise, it moves through the Missouri Compromise, it moves up through the compromises around Reconstruction. In every instance, these compromises, which, you know, compromise is a word that's taught to children as a positive value. You know, I have an 8-year-old daughter who knows that I wrote a book that's quite critical of compromise, but I think still can't quite work her head around the fact that compromise could be a bad thing, because she's told every day that compromise is good. And so when children are sitting in classes and being taught about these compromises that were made for the purpose of maintaining order in the Union, they're going to hear them as good things. But when you actually look into what all of these compromises did, you know, the Missouri Compromise meant that Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, legalized slavery south of the 36th parallel, and did nothing actually to prevent the Civil War, which still broke out several years later. So not necessarily a good thing. And I think that is very instructive, because we call these things compromises for a reason. They do carry the logic of compromise. And if we think very hard about them, they reveal to us the ways in which something that we've been taught to value actually has real problems for people who are often the least resourced in our society.
And those compromises that you listed there too also protected capital. I mean, not just white supremacy, but capital as well, which I think is important. Is important to point out, I guess.
That's absolutely right. And one of the things I talk about in the St. Louis example is that St. Louis was not, was not ever under strict Jim Crow legislation. And in fact, attempts to legally segregate St. Louis were overturned by the Supreme Court. But St. Louis today is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And it's absolutely as a result of economic factors rather than direct race laws. Of course, those economic factors include redlining, which was a directly racist practice. So the entanglement of anti-Black legislation and capitalist legislation, of course, is very clear.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about how compromise often leads to, as you say, actually much deeply terrible conflict and pain, even though it's presented as a halfway point between pain and progress. Sometimes it trends on the side of pain.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about that in very personal terms in the final chapter of the book, which is about, it's called Compromise and Lockdown, and it's about what we learn about compromise in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the notion of the lockdown as a sort of anti-compromising social structure. But one of the things that I explore in that chapter, which is much more personal than some of the other parts of the book, is what it looked like in my house for my spouse and I to be making these constant compromises, and the ways in which our sort of attempts to compromise our way out of an essentially painful situation by trading off childcare, by figuring out who was going to clean the house at what time, actually led us to bury the real reality of what was going on, which was just that we were both just in a state of pain and distress, despite our privilege and relative insulation from the worst parts of the pandemic. And I use that as a sort of analogy to talk about how we often do that as a society. We often use these sort of kind of technocratic compromises to patch up little problems here and there. And in so doing, misery accretes, and we don't deal with the source of our pain and injustice when we don't deal with the violence that's going on sort of under the surface.
Because it's like putting not putting a Band-Aid on a wound, but it really is. It's just like taking Advil when you have a cancerous growth. I mean, that kind of seems to be what it boils down to.
I mean, increasingly, that seems to be what we're doing to maintain capitalism, despite the crises that seem to be hitting it with increasing frequency.
So is compromise an obvious manifestation of the late stage capitalism? Would you say?
I would say that late stage capitalism makes compromising harder and harder and harder. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now, which is very interesting as masses of Americans quit their jobs, is a refusal to compromise when those compromises become so egregiously bad and the results of them become so unsatisfying that people will just refuse to do it.
So do you mind expanding on that a little bit, and that dynamic that's relatively new, about we're seeing the mass people taking early retirement or people mass quitting their jobs and looking for something else? How does that fit into your overall thesis?
I mean, I think it fits in insofar as one of the things that I talk about, especially toward the end of the book, is sort of what we were talking about earlier about how that capitalism demands compromises from us. And one of the major compromises is the way that work functions in a capitalist society. Capitalism demands that we trade our labor and our time for money. And increasingly, that means in the context of the pandemic, not only trading money and time, but trading safety, security, health. And I think that also the experience of lockdown showed a lot of people what they were missing when they were, when we're being asked to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So one of the ways to read the sort of mass quitting or anti-work movement that I think is emerging is that rather than seeing some sort of organized revolutionary general strike kind of formation against capitalism, we're seeing individual people just say that this is a bad deal and I'm not going to take it anymore. And it's showing that with the sort of concentration of wealth at the top, with the concentration of power at the top, eventually working people aren't going to see what they're doing as compromising. They're going to see what they're doing as suffering for no reason.
Right, which is the the reality. Well, anyway, your book's excellent on compromise, art, politics, and the fate of an American ideal. Rachel Greenwald Smith, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was a great discussion, I think.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit more, then wrap up the first hour of the show. We are back, and it seems we have some breaking news. Bradley, in all of his producing glory, has found that we now have a Sinema update. Kyrsten Sinema, Biden was supposed to be having, I don't know if this already happened yet, a lunch with the Senate Democrats in order to convince them to create a carve out of the filibuster in order to support voting rights legislation. Now, Sinema and Manchin have basically killed Build Back Better. And so why would they, when they have successfully provided a scalp, a big one, for the industries that represent them, and they've had a political win for their purposes, why would they suddenly now come to the table when they are feeling emboldened? That was what I said at the start of the show, and it seems like Sinema is proving me right, unfortunately for all of us.
I share the concerns of civil rights advocates and others I've heard from in recent months about these state laws. I strongly support those efforts to contest these laws in court and to invest significant resources into these states to better organize and stop efforts to restrict access at the ballot box. And I strongly support and will continue to vote for legislative responses to address these state laws, including the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that the Senate is currently considering. I support these bills because they strengthen Americans' access to the ballot box, and they better ensure that Americans' votes are counted fairly. It is through elections that Americans make their voices heard, select their representatives, and guide the future of our countries and our community. These bills help treat the symptoms of the disease, but they do not fully address the disease itself. And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country. The debate over the Senate's 60-vote threshold shines a light on our broader challenges. There's no need for me to restate my long-standing support for the 60-vote threshold to pass legislation. And there's no need for me to restate its role protecting our country from wild reversals in federal policy. It is a view I've held during my years serving in both the U.S. House and...
That's all I can handle of that. But the wild reversals thing, I'm sorry. Like, okay, let's say you do Medicare for all because you get rid of the filibuster. Obviously, that's really pie in the sky. Let the GOP try to reverse that. Mm-hmm. Do good things and let them have to waste their time when they do get in power reversing the good things as opposed to just cutting more taxes. I mean, But that's what Sinema wants. Is, I mean, she's a closet Republican, and the frustrating thing about the Democrats right now and Joe Biden is, like, you go to Atlanta to try to, like, garb yourself in, like, some like ancient Civil War like mystique, or civil rights mystique.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, the fight is not with like Bull Connor. It's not even with the Republicans. It's with your own party. And what do you do to confront them? You just talk about how mad you are. Like this is a dead party.
What, Bradley?
Oh, I was just saying, like, isn't that just? It's also just like what she's talking about. It's just like politics. Like, yeah, there's always a worry that like if you lose power, people will try to reverse what you did. Like, so the response is just don't do anything. Like,
yeah. The response is to, if you want to pass something, you get the 60 votes that I say that you need based on this arbitrary threshold that we have created, that I've decided is going to be natural and is more important than and is more important than the substance of the legislation that I say that I support, but I'm not going to do anything to pass. She understands that that will never pass with the 60 vote threshold. And it's just like, as you're saying, Matt, critiquing Republicans in this, it's like it's masturbatory and only that, and it's only there to just like put the blame on people who are not involved and are not in power now. The idea that Democrats feel entitled to power, that when they actually get it, they are unwilling to do anything that cements that power, even for their own self-interest.
I mean, the thing is we have two parties here. One party is attacking democracy. One party is supposed to be cultivating it, because that's the only way democracy in history has ever flourished, is like active, fighting to empower people as opposed to like structures of feudalism or capitalism.
Yeah.
But we have a party that has zero, like Bernie Sanders is the only person that like has a notion of how you would begin to cultivate democracy. Everything else is about managing it.
How are you going to go to voters and say to them, vote for me because I value democracy, or vote for me because I am the party that represents people, when we are unwilling to do anything that would cultivate or create pathways for representation? In fact, we're going to stand in the way of it and make sure that Senate procedure and, again, arbitrary thresholds are put up on a pedestal to such a degree that everybody else's well-being and humanity is secondary, to say the least. It's tertiary. It's like 99th on the list of our priorities. And the idea that the Biden administration didn't see this coming is just maddening. And he thinks that he can make a speech. No, you've got to twist some arms. We referenced LBJ on the show before. You've got to make sure that they feel uncomfortable, Sinema and Manchin, and the other people who probably feel the same way, like
Durbin, all these other folks. Yeah, I mean, but Biden's not going to do this. Yeah. And like that's the thing, is like, that's all I'm really concerned about for the next couple of years, is driving that lesson home, that we delivered these people the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and they participated and collaborated with attacks on democracy by not through inaction.
And again, if voting rights was this urgent, and it is, because I don't know if people realize it's 2022 now and the midterms are coming up where the Democrats are going to get shellacked, then this should have been the priority at the beginning, and it should have been an all-out blitz where Manchin and Sinema could not catch their breath, when they're not decoupling the bipartisan infrastructure bill from Build Back Better. You make that a whole thing, and at the same time you tackle voting rights. When Biden is at the peak of his popularity, right as he's entered office, now he's just plummeting because of things like this and his obvious weakness that just is evident with every word that he barely legibly or audibly says.
Yeah, I'm sorry, like who still approves of him? Like what kind of freak is still supportive of like the job he's been doing?
Just
it's
a Democrat voter.
Thing. Yeah.
A Democratic voter.
What is it, down to like 30% now?
I mean, it's like I think it's what, 40? I don't know.
Good.
But that I mean, and it's because of COVID. So the point is just that now this is the worst time to ask Sinema and Manchin for something. It is the absolute worst time because they just won. Does Biden not understand how incentives in politics work? When somebody wins, then they're not going to give you a win just to like make it evensies. We want a tie. All right. Anyway, We are gonna head into the fun half, question mark? We might not have Binder.
We will have Mitch McConnell, who was exactly right about some of this stuff.
We are, I think, going to head into the fun half now. We are going to be joined by Matt Binder and Brandon, who will tell us a little bit more about what's going on Doomed and on the discourse. But for now, Matt, what is happening on Left Reckoning?
Had a big show on Left Reckoning last night. First, Daniel Bessner on to talk about his end of the era of mass politics piece in the FX exchanges foreign exchanges Substack. Similar to kind of how our guest today talked about feeling a little bit put out or a little bit of anticlimacticism from the Women's March. We're stymied electorally and in terms of street politics. Both those things show certain signs of promise, but ultimately are not doing the job clearly. And so we talk about that, and also Jean Bajalan, the second of the TMBSOGs, coming back to talk about Turkey, Erdogan, Enos freedom, and Gulanism, and what's going on in Turkey. So a big show last night. We also talked about insider trading, and we were on Rockfin, and the very first show on Rockfin. And I just want to read a couple of the.
What is Rockfin?
It's a streaming service where they pay you in cryptocurrency, and we're happy to be invited on. And I just want to share the review. We've got a few comments from Rockfin. People are really liking us over there. And the two comments from the show is, "Here come the shitlibs." That I in shitlib there is exclamation point.
Gotcha.
Also, Krampus, the second comment, shitlibs don't belong on Rockfin. So a very sort of a victorious first Rockfin night for us last night. So patreon.com/leftrreckoning to get the post game, folks.
What is a shitlib? Is it just somebody who doesn't think that women are workers? Or somebody who thinks women are workers?
It's a really hard thing to understand because it's weird. A lot of people who like really complain about libs are libs.
Yeah.
Like Glenn Greenwald, for instance. But yeah, it's hard to understand. But I think it just means anyone who doesn't love capitalism, actually.
Ah, gotcha.
But I haven't been on Rockfin enough to know enough, so maybe that's a misinterpretation. But anyway, we have our two guests now. So
there we go. Perfect timing. We would like. Oh, there he is.
Oh, we also did voicemails in the post game last night. We have
fun.
a phone system for Left Reckoning now. So if you want to join that, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Binder, there you are. Hello. Good to see you. Long time no talk. Long time no.
Happy New Year, Emma. Yeah, it's the first time I've seen you this year.
I know. Happy New Year to you. What is happening over on Doomed?
Well, I did a stream on Tuesday where I basically tore into CNN and their recent segments on how the schools must be open. There was an especially egregious CNN Saturday morning program with Michael Smerconish that I needed to literally watch the whole thing with my audience on Tuesday night and break it down because it was unbelievable. Things like how one of the things that have really hurt kids during the pandemic is that graduating students who are going into the workforce don't know that it's inappropriate to call their bosses bro and dude. I'm literally not like embellishing this. This is exactly one of the things he said that to literally describe the term that he is calling the COVID kids. I mean, just unbelievable stuff. So I did that on Tuesday. And usually I do a show tonight on Thursdays, youtube.com/MattBinder. Not sure if I'm going to be doing it because I'm not feeling so hot today. So let's see. We'll see.
I was about to say, are you all good, or are you feeling like your voice sounds a little raspy?
Yeah, I you weren't here, but so last week I let the majority of our audience know that I got COVID over the and we were getting better. The whole family got it, and we were all getting better. And the one lingering thing I had was like I had really bad like bone aches, like especially in my back, like, and that never went away. And then today I like went to plug in like my computer charger, and I don't know what I did, but like the most painful shooting pain went straight up my spine. I literally thought I had to go to like the hospital. I thought I was going to be like paralyzed. My arms got numb. It was bad. I was able to lay down for a bit. So far, so good. Still, it hurts a bit, but I don't think I think I need a rest tonight. But I'll let you guys know. So follow me at Matt Binder on Twitter, and I will definitely let people know if I'm doing a show tonight.
I'm sorry. You should let us know if you just like need to hop off, Matt. I mean,
I will. Right now, this is good. I needed this, to be honest.
Okay.
So the question is, can I do this along with the 3-hour marathon shows I usually do on Thursday night? And that's probably not. But I'll let everybody know.
I'm not a doctor, Matt, but I also had back pain after COVID-19. But I kind of attribute it to me not stretching for like a decade of lifting. Have you tried foam rolling?
No. I mean, this has never happened. Like I've always from back in the day, always, not back issues, but it's back would bother me. I'd put on some icy hot. But like today is the first time it's ever like literally. I know what people mean now when people say their back went out. I previously did not know. Now I do.
As somebody who has thrown their back out lifting as a 20, when I was in my 20s, it does suck. Let me tell you though, if you're not stretching daily, your back is not going to be as supple as you think it is. You're not going to have the kind of flexibility and like core, activation you need to support yourself. And, sitting at a desk all day, you got to start stretching, man. A lot of people hit 35, 30, 25. They haven't stretched their entire life. And suddenly you're like, oh, back pain, add it into your life, man.
You just sold me. I was already thinking about it. As I was laying in bed, unable to move moments ago. But yeah. I mean, I used to actually get general exercise a lot because I would commute and I would not take buses and subways whenever I could. I would literally walk, many blocks as much as possible and back and forth everywhere. But then since the past 2 years, I've even lost that.
I am, look, no one is a bigger zealot than a convert. I went from like not stretching at all to like stretching daily because of COVID and, like making me not work out for a while. And let me tell you, the back, the hips, gotta stretch them.
All right. Well, I got you about that too. Are you talking about stretching on the discourse, Brandon?
I would like to talk about stretching in the discourse. I'm still editing the episode. So, the next episode, we'll talk about stretching. But I am, my live streams will, my card game live streams will be entirely card games, stretching and obscure early 2000s, late 90s movie trivia. Like, for example, have you seen Cadet Kelly recently? I have.
I have not seen Cadet Kelly.
Oh, I mean, Hilary Duff, Christy Carlson Romano, Sean Ashmore. That's typical early 2000s teen movie, but a lot of great messages, a lot of terrible messages too, as as was the times, but great movie.
All right. Well, we are going to head into the fun half. Now we'll be taking your calls today. We will be reading your IMs, and we'll be doing a set of ridiculous clips that we have in store for you today. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 238 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back.
Perfect. You're back. All right. I got caught again.
It's all right. They probably also heard of me and Brandon talking about being, I guess, old and our backs going out like we're grandpas.
Oh, my back is not. It didn't go out.
We have an IM with some advice on stretching.
Oh,
Great
okay.
stretch for lower back pain is a cat or kitten stretch. Get down on all fours, arch your back like a scared cat, and exhale while you do it. That's called cat-cow in yoga. Inhale and reverse the stretch so you can extend your stomach to the floor. Repeat it for a set of 12. Perform daily. Takes a few minutes and makes a big difference.
It does. Consistency is the most important part.
Yeah, that sounds like a great stretch to do, like in the morning, but when you like to avoid any sort of issues. Hearing it described now, I do not think I can pull that off.
Well, yeah, you got to recover first. Arnold Schwarzenegger definitely encourages stretching first thing in the morning. It increases the mind-muscle connection. So I do too.
I mean, if the Terminator says it, I believe it. Soy Boy Professor writes in, I feel like this is an appropriate question for the Thursday crew. Do any of you watch the show Yellow Jackets on Showtime? Curious of your thoughts. I do not, but I heard good things. Is Juliette Lewis in that?
She is. And the funny thing is, before you said that, I wasn't sure. I always get confused when someone says either of these shows' names. I'm like, did they say Yellow Jacket or Yellowstone? And which one is which? What? I can't remember.
My very sweet stepdad was like, Emma, you have to watch Yellowstone. And like over Christmas break, he showed it to me. It looks good, but I get why Republicans like it. I mean, I watched the first episode. I don't know. So continue. Sorry, Matt.
I mean, I put on the first episode of Yellowstone and the first episode of Yellow Jackets, and I will say I prefer Yellow Jackets much more. I Yellowstone, maybe I just need to give it another chance. It just wasn't for me. Maybe I'm not manly enough for Yellowstone. But Yellow Jackets seems like a very interesting premise, and got to keep watching that one.
Is it about like I've seen the I guess the thumbnail in one of my streaming apps. I don't know which one it's on because I have so many now, too many. Is it actually about like bees or wasps? I don't know what you call it. Or it's something that's like, it's like a name.
No, it's just the name. I think that was the name of the team, if I remember. It's set in modern day, and these journalists are trying to get information out of these girls, these grown women now, who back when they were in high school, they survived their soccer team was going to like the nationals, and the plane crashed in the wilderness, and only a few of them survived. And we get like flashbacks so far that show that the people that the young girls that did live didn't do such good things to survive to the girls who appear to not have survived. Yeah, so that's what that's about. It seems very interesting.
Josh from Tucson says, I just signed up for Rockfin and immediately recommended some anti-vax bullshit.
Oh yeah, I mean, can I just say, we are going to Rockfin, just candidly, not to bring audience there, but to try to gather more of that, like, present an alternative to a definite slant that platform has. That's outside of, there are people like Nomiki and Katie Halper and Empire Files. There are people on the left on there, but it is definitely right wing and anti-vax.
Is that a new like streaming service? Is that like a new
yeah.
YouTube? Oh, okay.
That's they had reached out to me actually a little while ago, and I was cautious about, but if a bunch of actual lefties are joining there, maybe it makes sense to try to fill up that platform with more of our stuff.
Yeah.
There are just so many platforms to keep track of, and like if you engage with each, if I was on every platform that I got a vague email that they were starting one, I'd be on a lot of platforms. So I tend to be selective. I'm not even on like Instagram.
Yeah.
J-Man Rap says, hey, I'm a great interview as always. Your Knicks are back to 500. Too bad they're still behind my Raps. Anyway, I was at that game last night, masked. Anyway, some of Andy Neo's followers on Twitters are literal Nazis who are up to the same old death threats again. Just a reminder, Joe Rogan platformed him and didn't challenge his BS. Great job, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, some Joe Rogan defenders might say he lightly challenged his BS, but yeah, Andy No admitted on Dave Rubin's show that he's motivated by anti-communism. In his own words, that what he saw growing up, and I think that that you can take anti-communism a little bit too far into fascism sometimes, and I think that would be my characterization of what Andy No has done. I think he's dishonest propagandist for people like Proud Boys and the cops. So, and it's not a surprise that Rogan would give him a semi-favorable here, and probably invite him back in the future.
Oh, he's like he's easily one of the worst. He steals content from other people in order to, without giving credit, and also distorts what's actually going on in these clips. He's a guy who actually, and most, I would say the most people I didn't even see doing this. He's one of the guys who tried to defend the father-son duo who murdered Arbery. Like the one, like one of the few cases where like it was so clear that even this justice system said they murdered this unarmed black man and we're sending them both to life in prison.
Gotta know your audience.
Yep.
Yeah, his audience is fascists.
Let's take a call or two. Calling from a 978 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Mark from Massachusetts.
Mark from Massachusetts. What are you calling about?
I was just wondering if you guys have any theories as to why it is that liberals and centrists keep listening to people who have been wrong about everything. Like Larry Summers is this person who's just like his policy recommendations under Clinton Obama have consistently just been wrong. But he's still treated as this, this great intellectual and somebody who should be taken very seriously. Right. Thomas Friedman's another example. Like the guy, I think he was the person who said we should go into Iraq because suck on this.
Yep.
And there seems to be so many thoughtful people on the left, but who are still obscure and not really taken seriously outside like The Nation or something.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, you're allowed to be wrong in certain ways, as long as you are protecting power, right? Larry Summers protects the banks. Somebody like Tom Friedman, especially during the Iraq War, was vigorously supportive of the war effort. So you can be wrong as long as you don't piss off anybody
it's
power.
less about being wrong or right and more about being useful to power.
Exactly. So that's my short answer to that.
Yeah, and just to jump off that too, I just quickly, I think that to that degree, being wrong is only so meaningful insofar as that people can hold you accountable for being wrong, and that there's like an expectation that you'll be right in the future, and some kind of record under which we're gauging some, like how many wrongs versus rights. But since for the most part, people are allowed to be wrong in certain ways and continue to be platformed by the same places, and it's like sort of just like a cat and mouse game with it. People just develop like a broken rationality system where like each time they're presented with this person, they have to give them the benefit of the doubt until they're proven wrong again. Because like, yeah, they're held hostage by them. Like, if you're going to engage with the New York Times at all, you're going to be engaging with an op-ed section full of people who are wrong constantly, but still there. So either you justify it by they might be right this time, or you stop reading it. Or you don't know that they're wrong all the time.
Okay, so you think that that the reason that they're still listened to is because the policies that they endorse are still favorable to the people who get to decide who is and isn't platformed, right?
Bingo. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I think all that is true, but also I think in addition to that, there is this level that you can get to in certain industries. I mean, in media is one, financial industry is another, the business world, for example, entrepreneurs, like look at Donald Trump. Like you get to a point where you are so big in that world that literally everyone around you will make sure that when you fail, they'll prop you up and back you up. Because you got to keep, you have to keep the current web tight. If, we don't want one of the dominoes falling, and look, who knows, maybe we'll all see repercussions for all the different areas where we've been wrong. So that's another thing, I think, like once you get to a certain
New York Times or MSNBC or CNN, we oftentimes like to pretend like they're able to craft out this entirely neutral space for themselves just by having a few people who claim to be on the right, claim to be on the left, claim to be, even though if they're, just by watching it, you can see it all skews one way.
Sorry, yes, we're back? Okay, good. Apologies, we just had a quick freeze. But thanks. Did it? And I think he hung up. All right. Well, appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Let's do one of these clips, shall we?
Let's do it. I haven't even looked them over yet. Let's see these clips. Let's see what we got here.
I think I got. Oh, man, there's a few that are pretty ridiculous here. But I guess let's start. Let's start with Matt Walsh. Should we? Damn. Do you guys?
I mean, he really is one of the dumbest. So I mean, I'm sure whatever you guys pulled from Matt Walsh is bound to give us lots to talk about.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll start there then. So Matt Walsh, who is aggressively untalented, but always seeking headlines and trying to find a way to stand out from his colleagues at the Daily Wire, right? He's a Daily Wire guy. Whether it's doing in-person reporting, on the ground reporting about critical race theory, or it's just saying things as outlandishly as possible in order to get headlines, which unfortunately we're going to provide him with this, but it needs to be broken down.
He's the sort of guy that puts theocratic fascist ironically in his Twitter bio, even though that is absolutely what he is.
Yes, he's trying to wink as he says it, but that's the reality. And there's never been a time where it's been more evident than this clip, where he just straight up says that he is not in favor of universal voting and believes that only a privileged few should be able to vote.
Well, as you know, this subject is always difficult for me emotionally. Whenever I hear Democrats panicking over the attack on voting rights, it hits me right in the heart. It shakes me to the core, gets my hopes up, because I very much wish that there was an attack on voting rights. I think universal voting rights is one of the worst ideas this country has ever had. There are few things more worthy of coming under attack than universal voting rights. Voting ought to be a privilege reserved for those who are most competent and qualified. It's not a natural right.
Pause it.
God did not imbue us all with
most competent and qualified. So that includes him. And also just like, I just want people to realize he's almost plagiarizing from the racist conservatives during Jim Crow who made these exact same points in order to justify like poll taxes and literacy tests at polling sites. So just a reminder that that's the kind of throwback conservatism that he thinks is so edgy right now.
What words did he just use to describe who should get to vote?
We'll go back a little bit. Yeah.
Competent, qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so vague though. What is competent and qualified? Like even
white conservatives.
No, it means property.
Well,
that's what that's what I was going to.
Z-list YouTube pundits in their audiences. So, I hate to say it, but we get the vote still.
Then universal voting rights. Voting ought to be a privilege reserved for those who are most competent and qualified. It's not a natural right. God did not imbue us all with some sort of sacred entitlement to participate in our national elections. The Bible certainly makes no mention of any such thing. So if it's not a natural right, which it emphatically is not, then it's a privilege that we grant, and it would be wise to consider a person's basic qualifications.
All right, based on this standard, does the Bible say anything about owning guns?
Sorry, why the fuck are we talking about the Bible?
Yeah, well, I mean, because he's a theocrat. But the point is, even by his own standard, if the great pause there, Bradley, he looks amazing. Keep that up, by the way. By his own standard, if it's not in the Bible, then it's not a right that needs to be protected by the government. So, guess the guns don't count. Keep going.
Before granting it, we are under no moral obligation to allow hordes of stupid, bewildered, clueless zombies to flood the voting booth and cast their ballots in a state of ignorance and confusion, helping to steer this giant ship of a country right into one iceberg after another. So that's my position, which I state often and without apology. I'm against voting rights. I don't like them. If it was a position shared by most conservatives and by any significant portion of elected Republicans, Democrats would be correct in claiming that universal voting rights are under assault, are at risk. But sadly, it is all in the left-wing imagination. I am, a lone voice in the wilderness on this issue.
Wow, how brave of you.
He's coming out against voting, a powerful state and a powerful stance in a democracy, I guess, representative republic, whatever the fuck we are. People always, have a name for it, but it's not important.
There's a lot of things these guys would complain about. There's a lot of things these guys complain about, I should say, that literally are not mentioned in the Bible at all. I would love to see how many times Matt Walsh complained about deplatforming. Oh, I'm sorry, Jesus didn't say anything about the social networks. Oh well, looks like that's just how it is.
First of all, Jesus deplatformed those lenders from the church that time. I've seen a lot of movies about the Bible. I watched all God is not dead. So I'm also pretty sure there are sections of the Bible about voting or choosing leaders that he just probably hasn't read it, and I'm definitely not going to fact check it. But I mean,
Jesus Christ hated decentralized finance.
The funny thing about conservatives, I don't believe that we have universal voting rights. Obviously, we do not, because we at the very least we have felon disenfranchisement. But he's speaking about a version of America, the ideal version of America for that you see in sitcoms where everyone has the right to vote and our leaders are chosen that way. He's like, that sucks. No one hates America more than conservatives. It's so funny. They just like the idea of an America that's a libertarian bastion that has ultimately never existed and is not even within, the boundaries of what the founding fathers would have said that they wanted. I mean, they established public schools right at, with the country.
And also, you can welcome half measures without them being the full thing that you want, right? I welcomed both Biden and Trump giving COVID relief to people, even though it wasn't full socialism. And just Walsh welcomes any sort of thing that on the margins cuts people off the voter rolls based on ID requirements or things like gerrymandering. I'm sure he's a big fan of, because of, you tie it to the land, you're getting more competence, I think, somehow in his mind. But this is all Republicans. This is actually what they all think. They just aren't incentivized to be explicit about it on the Daily Wire for branding, because it's a liability to their politics. Whereas it's an asset to Walsh.
I mean, exactly. To that point, this is what they all think, at least at the national level, and it's reflected in the way they gerrymander their districts and the way that they ensure that the elections are done as anti-democratically as possible. And it's one of the things that the Democratic Party just kind of sometimes harps on, they'll do this little voting rights push, and if it passes or doesn't pass, we won't hear about the fact that Republicans are cheating in all of the elections until the day before the elections. That's a way to drive us out into the street, the polls, to vote against them. But the reflection that the Republican Party is not playing a fair game and are actively trying to through gerrymandering, illegal gerrymandering, rig the vote in their favor, never seems to affect how they are treated by the larger political media apparatus, which should be illegitimate. They're an illegitimate party that is trying to carve out 50% or more of the country voting power, with less than 50% of the country's population, along with a few prisoners in their districts. And it's just it's such a delegitimizing thing. But because we have to pretend our system works, the Republican Party, that's just one of their tactics, and it shouldn't be how we view them as, let's be honest, a bunch of anti-democratic.
Well, they're minoritarians. I mean, that's the only way that they're able to wield power, is by over-representing a segment of the population by hook or by crook. But that's nothing new with conservatives. That's part of why the disenfranchisement of Black people was such a high priority, because that, for conservatives, that means, okay, that's a threat to the established order. And that's why it's not edgy for someone like Matt Walsh to be only property owners and basically white people should be able to vote. That goes back to ancient times, ancient Greece or whatever, but it's also very American, because that was a part of our founding. And so he just doesn't want to say, I equate capital success, because maybe some of his viewers aren't in the same boat as him. I equate capital success with worth and value in a society, and those are the only people who are valuable enough to make decisions. That's it.
Absolutely. And for me, I just think it's something that should always, when you talk to a Republican, you should bring up how just they are trying to rule and give the semblance of this idea that we are an evenly split country, with a third of the population sort of agreeing with them. And, but again, the sort of back and forth between Republicans and Democrats are more for show, versus an actual push by Democrats to edge them out in the same way the Republicans are trying to edge them out, which is what makes the kind of dynamic very, stressful if you watch it. You have one party who's no, we're going to try to kill our opponents, literally. And the other party's this is my best friend, and I understand he has some problematic views, that election shouldn't be fair, but we work together, and it would be rude when we meet around a water cooler to bring that up.
Sweaty Stack writes in, oh god damn it, no, it's Emma, I'm torn. As a football fan, I really want to see the Cowboys lose Sunday, but as a Packers fan, I don't know if I want to face that 49ers run game. If you are, I would be very, very worried if the 49ers, if you guys are betting, I mean, it's a dark horse, but I think they're in some sports books, plus 1,500 to go to the Super Bowl, to win the NFC. It's a good value there. And I would be very worried if I were a Packers fan with the 49ers coming there, because the 49ers have their number. Chardonnay.
Emma, is there any shit coins you'd like to promote as well while we're telling people financial advice? I
mean, I'm open that I sports gamble, and just do it responsibly if you have extra money.
And now 2 minutes of disclaimers.
Be gamble aware.
Yeah.
So Emma, what you're saying is I should definitely go cash in any money. I should just sell off everything I can and buy myself a lazy lion.
I would like to promote Let's Go Brandon coin. I've seen that's going to the moon, baby.
If this benefited me, it would be a grift, but unfortunately I do not, I'm not employed by a sports book, although I'm sure that would be a very lucrative position right now, since New York just legalized it. Discos 2, would cutting Sinema off from DNC funding have any effect? Obviously Manchin is different since a different Dem couldn't win there, but sure seems like there's more to be done to force her to move on, move on voting rights.
Well, there's not a whole lot of leverage like the squad has, for instance, and that's the one thing that I've thought of is like they do like the amount of money that AOC particularly brings in.
But I don't think she donates that to the Senate. To the
Senate, right.
The Senate campaign coffers, like. But
does Bernie? I mean, that's the sort of stuff, right? Like,
right.
there's got to be fences put around these sorts of funds.
Right.
I don't know if anything's changed because it's been a while since I paid attention, but I do know that at least Bernie would do fundraisers for them, but he would not share like his own, like he would raise money for them, but it's money that was donated to his like specific. That
was in the presidential race, and then they were trying to get him to share his email list, but I don't know specifically about the Senate fundraising. It might be a different system, because there's like the Democratic Congressional Committee has they share more money, I think. Aaron is not cool said there was a disgusting Matt Walsh ad on YouTube where he reads his anti-trans children book to children. That's not shocking. Bing Bong says Ben Shapiro said the same thing about how not everyone should have an equal say in the country as Matt Walsh. I know, but like Matt Walsh thinks he's edgy by just coming out and just saying I'm anti-voting. Let's take another call here. Calling from a 773 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, yo, how's it going? This is Shy Bureaucrat. I'll go by that name.
Shy Bureaucrat?
I'm going to talk. Yeah, Shy
Gotcha.
Bureaucrat. Yeah.
Okay, where are you from?
Chicago.
Chicago.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I want to.
Not shy as in like, you know.
Like, ooh.
Not like the team. Not like the
timid, I guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
took us a while to come
like
up for a synonym for shy.
Yeah, right. I mean, because I'm so bold. I mean, antonyms. I got them all day.
Shy Bureaucrat, what are you calling about?
I'm calling to complain about my employer, Chicago Public Schools.
Gotcha.
Oh, nice.
That's why I'm using that name. So, you know, the whole thing last week, you know, with our teachers voting to move remote, obviously it was just chewed up and spit out as them voting to like not work at all, which is just not true. And unfortunately that was circulating a lot. But the core of the problem here is that we had to wait for a union action, a strong union action to get like any sort of movement in any direction. And right now the policy that they're kind of agreeing on is just tertiary in terms of what needs to be done. The administration, you know, the Lightfoot's administration right now is just not taking this seriously. And their responses during the press conferences have been wholly just like inadequate over last week. And this is just indicative of how much our country's shit response to this is just rolling downhill. You know, the feds put it off to the state puts it off to the municipality puts it off to fucking businesses to like handle this shit. And, you know, teachers are asking for tests, right? You know, they're starting out high, negotiating and say, we want tests for everybody. Maybe that's not going to get done, right? But they're trying to negotiate down to something like even just testing like 10% of our student population at any given time. The problem is, right, yeah, we have a lot of federal money right now, but our fucking Dr. Arwadi last week said the CDPH, or Public Health Department, doesn't have any fucking tests. And we just had to buy a bunch of tests from J.D. Pritzker last week because we don't even have like the supplies. And, you know, and it's unfortunate. And we do have the federal resources, right, in our budget to do this. Like I work on this stuff all day long. We don't have bodies in a lot of cases, right? The administration talks about how they want to put nurses at the center of all this and have them lead the charge, so to speak. We don't have bodies there, right? There are some schools that probably don't even have a nurse right now.
Yeah.
These were positions that the CTU was fighting for in their last negotiation. So they were ahead of this whole situation, knowing the need that schools have in terms of clinicians and nurses. We don't have the bodies there. We have teachers out every day on either a day-to-day or slightly long-term. We're running out of subs, right? Like, we have all this money, and there's, like, in literal cases, there aren't tests to buy. There aren't people to fill the positions. There aren't just resources out there to spend this money on, and it expires in 3 years, right? So it's like, what the fuck are we going to do? If we even want to have a somewhat rigorous testing regime, and they want to rely on the data, and they say the data that says that schools are safe, what fucking data, excuse my French, what data are they relying on there? It's not reliable. You all probably saw the news headlines with the FedEx drop-off boxes full of tests. Only like 10% of those were actually processed. And guess what the test positivity rate was for them? Like 18%.
That's nuts.
Not good.
Not good.
Not good. So it's just it's absolutely insane. The amount of gaslighting on this is just terrible. Liberals are terrible. They don't care about us. It's just like extremely frustrating to hear this, and it has to be a polarized union action to even get them to like move their feet just a little bit to do some real just common sense shit. So it's really upsetting that I have to work through this.
Yeah.
And see this kind of on the ground, and like knowing that we have the money to spend, but like literally the incompetence from all the way up, there's just like nothing to buy. Like the free market's just gonna, like, the invisible hand's gonna drop up a bunch of tests for us to buy or something like that. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a total shit show. I mean, did you have a take on the compromise position that Lightfoot and the Chicago Teachers Union did end up agreeing to?
Yeah, I didn't see what the entire body of teachers, because they were voting on what the House of Delegates voted on, right? To see if the entire union agreed. I didn't see what the result of that was. Look, I didn't see anything really there new, right? They're saying that they are going to put in some metrics. If 30% of teachers are out, then they will convene some emergency committee to then vote on whether they want to just move that school remote. They want to take the, as Lori Lightfoot says, surgical approach to this and shut down school by school. Yes, it's probably hard, to take the full position of shutting down all schools all at once, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's politically
that's difficult to do, right?
They don't. It's both things. It's like it's a double whammy. One, bosses want their employees available to them, and if their kids are home, that's not going to happen. And two, there are a lot of people who just want this to be wished away, and it's just politically toxic for a politician to do the right thing in this instance, even though it's the right thing, obviously.
Yeah, and to meet these metrics, like, quite frankly, again, I don't think we have the testing capacity yet. And the mayor was totally against the opt-out model, which many other school districts are doing, and having an actual successful policy in place. She's totally against that. She wants an opt-in because putting a swab up a kid's nose is like a quasi-medical procedure to them. But, like, to evaluate whether we're at that 30% mark, and at some schools, 30% of teachers can be like 60 people, just do the exponential growth on 60 people being infected in a school. I don't think we have the testing capacity to really, like, truly evaluate and never get to that metric. So I think, like, what they offered is kind of horseshit, and I don't think the implementation side of it is really as strong as it really needs to be. It could be a decent position.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, but I have no confidence that they'll actually be able to realistically rely on the data that they keep saying is good and positive in terms of schools being safe.
Well, hang in there, shy bureaucrat. It sounds insanely frustrating, but I appreciate the call. Thanks for keeping us updated.
No problem. Thanks for letting me play. Yeah, you too.
Bye. Yeah, it's a shit show. Definitely sounds like that.
It's just good to see, Nate Silver and Jen Psaki and Matt Iglesias and Jimmy Dore and all these people fighting the elites and the pharmaceutical companies and these fear-mongered teachers unions.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you guys something interesting. So I don't want to out anybody. Maybe they want me to name them, but I'll get confirmation of them first. So there's someone who lives in my neighborhood who's a Jimmy Dore fan. And the reason I know that is because when I moved into the neighborhood, he recognized me from the Majority Report, and he's very friendly, very nice guy. We'll have discussions, debates about stuff when I see him walking outside. We don't agree about everything, but he was a big Jimmy Dore fan. And the other day I run into him and he says to me how he's disappointed in Jimmy Dore. And I was like, why? And he's like, he was looking at Jimmy Dore's channel the other day, and all it is COVID stuff after COVID stuff after COVID stuff. And then he looked at the one non-COVID clip in that, that string of clips,
Anti-vax COVID.
Anti-vax, yes. It was like COVID hoax, anti-vax stuff. And then the one non-COVID anti-vax video was a clip looking back on the 1-year anniversary of Force the Vote. Yep. And this is a guy who was totally on board with Force the Vote, I should say. He believed that was a good thing. So, but I'm not going to get there. But he was really shitty and said a lot about the direction that Dore was going. That Force the Vote anniversary clip only had like 50,000 views, and all the other clips surrounding it, but on the anti-vax stuff, all had 150,000 views, 250,000 views, 400,000 views. And I was like, yeah, man, I mean, he's clearly he knows where the bread and butter is now. He doesn't care about Force the Vote anymore. It's not supplying him with the audience or the views.
Jimmy's purism as far as Medicare for All and the Force the Vote thing only started once it became useful for him, which is after, say, the primary, when there was one person who supported it, and he endorsed a candidate.
Supported Medicare for All,
and he endorsed a candidate who said single payer was un-American. And then he decides, because it became like out of the realm of possibility, because Joe Biden, the guy who said he vetoed Medicare for All, actually won, a guy who, by the way, Tulsi endorsed. Then it was a useful media thing for a little bit, and that's clearly all it was. Like that, all they wanted to do was to monetize basically the coming failure to get Medicare for All.
Right. I mean, I just brought it up to basically point out that, like, there is a Jimmy Dore audience that is being turned off by what he's doing, and I think it's important to continue to call him out, because there are well-meaning people who, when you watch someone over the years, for as long as some of these fans must have been, but it's hard to, like, I could imagine if Sam Seder was out there and did an about face all of a sudden. Some people listening to him for a decade, I'm sure they wouldn't turn on him.
I mean, like, you say that, but Sam wouldn't do that because, like,
right, of course he wouldn't, right? But I'm just using that as an example. Like, people watch.
Even when I worked with Jimmy, I had, like, okay, this guy's a little cuckoo. Like, I mean, even when he was saying progressive stuff, like, there was never a realism that underpinned it. It was just like, let's follow the wind of the views.
It's still amazing to me that this is the guy that spat at Alex Jones when he met him in person. I mean, I feel like nowadays, I mean, in some instances, I feel like maybe Alex Jones would spit at him this time.
No, they're probably going to do business together. But
they're buddies.
This is a guy who literally
could be buddies.
On TYT said anyone who goes on Tucker Carlson should have a serious think about themselves and the racism they're engaging in. Right? He literally said that on TYT like within a half decade.
Right. Speaking of this man, between the 101 and the 5 says, I ate a bunch of horse shit because Jimmy Dore told me to and still got COVID. But now I just smoke Sunset Lake CBD all day, every day. No COVID, bitches. All right. All right. This will be my final football. I am. Warren from Toronto. Em, are you taking the Bills or the Pats for Saturday? I'm a Bills fan. They used to come to Toronto for preseason to play. I love Josh Allen, but of course you can never count out Belichick. I know that's one of the games I'm least confident. Maybe the game I'm least confident in this weekend. And I would say that because I've heard, I would bet the spread on the Pats covering, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Like, the thing is apparently it's going to be really cold and the Bills can't run the ball, but the Pats can really run the ball. But the thing is that does that even matter when Josh Allen can throw it 1,000,000 miles an hour in the cold? So I don't really have an answer for you, but I'm excited for that game, and I like both teams, so I'm rooting for it just to be a good game.
I can't believe it's football season already. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's been.
When does football season start?
Isn't it ending? Isn't this the end? Isn't the Super Bowl in like a couple weeks?
Yes, the playoffs are the first weekend of the playoffs this weekend. So it starts in September. Yeah. Dang,
even I knew that, and I don't pay attention to football at all.
In my head, I think that like they don't play sports at the same time. Like I think, like I just think like, oh, it's basketball season, and then it's like football season, like not at the same time. But I don't think that's true.
The summer
basketball
Emma, can you speak to that?
No,
basketball season's the one that confuses me, because I know that NFL is fall to winter. I know that baseball is spring and summer, but basketball, I feel like basketball is always on. That's the one that confuses me.
Would you say baseball's a sport? Because I wouldn't say it is.
Oh, it is.
Baseball is like, early spring to the October to the fall, when the summer is the dead zone. Hockey and basketball basically play at the same time, and that's from October to the end of the regular season in April, May.
I'm always surprised that they do that and really fight for those overlapping fans, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's not an overlapping set for me. But anyway, I won't bore you guys anymore with this. Let's do another.
That was very informative. I've always wondered.
But yeah, the summer for me is like when I watch the least amount of sports, because I'm not that big of a baseball fan. That's the only thing that's on.
And as the WWE would say, we don't have seasons. We're year round.
We have a wet season and a dry season. So.
This clip was incredibly perplexing to me. Dana Perino on Fox News, and she's supposed to be one of their more sane and grounded voices, had a thought about a potential presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. I guarantee you that you're not going to see who she floated coming, because it is so damn stupid.
Etc. Oh, everyone thought, that President Bush was stupid. It was a ridiculous notion. And the other thing is about Bill Maher. Where you can trace it back to one particular moment, I think, on the campaign trail that led to the Trump supporters feeling very much like they could all band together, and that was when Hillary Clinton called them a basket of deplorables. And you can imagine what was happening in progressive cloakrooms all across the country and in the bars, that they were saying, yeah, exactly, she nailed it. And then they realized their mistake, and they've been trying to make up for it in a way ever since. It'll be interesting to see if Bill Maher is recruited to run for the presidency, actually, because it's only somebody like that. The last thing I would say is that we grow up and we learn about the importance of forgiveness and grace. And there's also the great American tradition of this melting pot that we have with lots of ideas. We need to return to that in some way, in a big way, right away.
I agree. And Dagan, though, I've heard some.
Everyone agrees, because this is the thing, is that this is a response to when Bill Maher, once again on his program, who, by the way, when's the last time Bill Maher was relevant to anybody on the left? It was, 2006? He recently, or to Democrats, like, he recently said that he was just lecturing the left, saying the far left thinks they're superior and they look down on everybody else. And that's why someone like Dana Perino was like, this speaks to me, and he should definitely be a presidential candidate. That's why he shouldn't be a presidential candidate for Democrats, because it speaks to you.
Yeah, I just want to plug a Left Reckoning video, Communism, Christopher Hitchens versus Bill Maher and Dennis Prager, in which Bill Maher, this is like 2000, says that the Vietnam War was worthwhile. It was worthwhile to have all those people killed. Because it won us the Cold War in the late 80s. Like Reagan wouldn't have been able to say, tear down that wall if we didn't invade Vietnam, or we could have invaded somebody else, but we needed to invade somebody and have a whole bunch of massless death. Like, he's a psychopath. And I mean, he might run for president, and the Democrats.
I mean, he didn't get in trouble for that one, but didn't he get in trouble for saying that the terrorists weren't like cowards who flew into like 9/11?
Yeah, that was like a semi. Like he said, yeah. Like he said,
that was a good point. He made a good point, and he lost the show for it. That's how you know. That's how you know not to make a good point again.
It's not cowardice, right? Exactly. It's something else. It's fundamentalism, but.
I mean, and he's also like this kind of atheist, and he was, when I was like, becoming an atheist as a teenager, I watched Religulous, and even then I was like, this guy's one of the smuggest people ever, and he treats people with such contempt. And you unpack it, and I remember that viral clip with Ben Affleck, who was on his show, and he wasn't doing a great job trying to counteract Mars Islamophobia, but he was right in his outrage about it, was because Bill Maher is this kind of guy who really has a lot of right-wing tendencies, including that despite being an atheist, he is insanely Islamophobic, and that's the kind of thing that like he's super pro-Israel because despite not believing in God, yeah, but some religions are a little more sane than others. Some religions I can understand, and so he is a right-winger at this point in his career trajectory, and that's why it appeals to someone like Dana Perino. Like, and then there's the added layer of these likely incredibly wealthy Fox hosts just sitting remotely, by the way, talking about how they feel about different presidential candidates, and they just see this as a huge game where a TV host like Bill Maher, let's just throw him out there and he'll run for president.
Also, they're all secretly godless, so they're not offended by Bill Maher's religious stuff, as they probably should be if they were honest about.
Well, it's the same thing with Trump, right? I mean, he doesn't care, but they have to appeal to those kinds of people. Anyway, all right, let's do another clip.
Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this My Pillow guy clip?
Sure. Why don't you?
I love the Mike Lindell clip.
Why don't you?
So Mike. Sure. So My Pillow guy Mike Lindell is still out there promoting the idea that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from Donald Trump, and he's doing this because he believes it. And also, in my estimation, at this point, we're now a year or more than a year out, and he's sunk in a lot of money into trying to prove this. So when you're that deep into it, millions of dollars and millions of dollars into this, I mean, you're not going to just give up. You're going to keep going. It's the same thing as like when you gamble and you lose a little bit of money and you go, I'll win it back. And then that's how you become addicted and lose everything.
Is that's what at me or
a little bit, maybe. But so Mike Lindell's out there still pushing this stuff. But this most recent clip from Mike Lindell might be Mike Lindell at his absolute best. Let's take a listen to peak My Pillow guy.
Everything you're going to see over these next 7 months to get rid of the machines. You're going to see the Supreme Court case coming out. All these great things, everybody. By the way, you can find more at frankspeech.com. I'll put that out there. There are so many. I'm more optimistic today than I have been yesterday, the day before that. I'm on an incline like this. Why? Because it's so amazing. All the things that we already have all the pieces of the puzzle. And you talk about evidence. We had enough evidence to put everybody in prison for life, 300 and some million people. We had that all the way back to November, December. But what we have are these other things that had to happen, which was all evil revealing itself. I mean, evil's popping up like pocket gophers. I mean, they pop their heads up, it's whack-a-mole, right? I mean, it's everywhere. And that all had to be revealed so that we can fix it.
So
300 something million people.
Is that most of the population of the United States?
I believe, depending on how much something he's talking about, but I will guess that 300 million something means it's more than 300 million. We're looking at a non-prison population in this country of about, let's say, 25 million people at most.
I think
the chosen
there's around 330 million people in this country. That's the population of the U.S. So we're talking about imprisoning 300 million plus of them. It's a lot of Trump supporters as well, I should say. So it's not like they just want to own the libs. Mike Lindell just wants to pretty much own everybody at this point.
I think that if we're honest about the trajectory of America, that's pretty accurate. Just like, climate wars and 300 million people in jail. And that sounds like a platform a Republican could run on in at least 2000. Whoa.
At least people have guaranteed housing. I mean, it might be a little bit difficult to run the prison from that 25 million people's perspective to I guess stop some sort of uprising. You would have to make the conditions so favorable and so cushy. Make it like a Norway prison system.
I would imagine it's going to be more of like an Escape from New York situation where they just build like a wall around a portion of America that counts as the prison. And then like the people who aren't in that prison are on the opposite side of that wall. Or I guess considering how few people would be in prison, you could do it the opposite way. But I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose of prison. It's not a practical thing, obviously. But I say that, but who he reminds me of here is Donald Trump when he was doing that birther shit. Because that is what this sounds like. That every few weeks, there's like more evidence, there's more stuff coming out, there's like more like secret private investigators flying to Hawaii and pulling up like birth certificates, and there's more people digging into these voting machines. And eventually, I think he's still being sued by Dominion Voting Company, so that probably won't go away. But eventually, had that not happened, this kind of thing would go away, and he would just be remembered for that guy who like kept the torch burning within the Republican Party. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he's in that primary in 2024, assuming he's not one of the 300 million plus people in jail by then.
He might accidentally imprison himself, right? But what's amazing to me is like, what a grift those people around him have going. It must be one of the greatest grifts of all time. Like literally these like people presented themselves to him as like computer experts who found the real election data that showed it was all wrong. And they convinced him to give them millions of dollars to like help gather more of this evidence and whatever. And then he holds his big 3-day event, and they basically don't show up for him at the event. And then when interviewed on their own, they basically say, yeah, I mean, we have the data and it doesn't show what Mike Lindell says it shows. I mean, if I remember correctly, one of them even made enough money from him that he straight up went and bought like a multi-million-dollar mansion just with the money Mike Lindell has given him. So, I mean, what a grift they got going on here. And to steal an analogy from Tim Pool, I feel like Thanos of the Avengers would hear Mike Lindell saying 300 out of 330 million people, and even Thanos would be like, "That's much too far. What are you doing?"
It makes way more sense if you know how population growth works to do that many, but it probably wouldn't work out as well.
Let's take another call. Calling from a 786 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Emma. This is Dr. Gus calling from Florida.
Dr. Gus?
Yes, that's right.
Dr. Gus from Florida. How are you?
Oh, Dr. Gus is a great caller. He calls into my show all the time. He's yeah. How you doing, Dr. Gus?
Now I'm gonna get nervous.
Are you a real doctor, or is it like a Dr. Dre scenario?
He's a veterinarian.
Oh, so it is like a Dr. Dre scenario.
He was very helpful when I was discussing ivermectin, I should say.
Yeah, don't be nervous, Dr. Gus. What's on your mind?
I'm just a pretend doctor. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you guys an update from Florida. The COVID situation here is pretty bad. I had two sisters that are kind of in the Florida public system. One is was up until last week a teacher in an elementary school near Tampa. I think I wrote a message a few months ago about the AC being broken. I don't know if you remember that they had a broken AC and they couldn't open the windows and doors.
Yes.
Right. So it's been about 5 months, and the AC was still broken, still hasn't been fixed, and they're still not allowed to open the door because of school shooters. So she was the only teacher there that spoke Spanish. Everyone else was just an English speaker in Tampa, which is an area that is like one of the bluest areas in Florida, and it's full of Hispanic immigrant children. So she was the only Spanish speaker in the school. She found a job at a nearby university that paid about the same, and the hours were like half the time. So she ended up leaving the profession now. She's much happier, but it took her about a month to decide because, the kids, and that's what they do. So when she put in her 2-week notice, She also tested positive for COVID a couple of days after. So she notified the school, and the school said, come in anyway. We need you for those 2 weeks. She ended up taking the sick days that she had left to not show up. But they're doing nothing about COVID. And the same thing is going on in the University of Florida. One of my sisters is there. She tested positive, and she stayed off campus. And then once she wanted to come back on campus, she started emailing the administration, calling the phone numbers that are given out to ask what's due. She didn't get any answers for about 2 days. The professors were not sure about the protocols. The state health department never responded. No guidance at all. So it's just complete abdication of any kind of duty to the public. So, I mean, at least right now, we're kind of used to dealing with COVID, but I don't know what's going to happen in a few years when something else, some other disease appears, you know? The whole health system has been completely deteriorated purposefully, you know, to just not make COVID into a big deal, at least in Florida. It's going to be a disaster. If it was already a disaster before this, because it wasn't put together purposefully, now it's being destroyed purposefully, and nobody's taking any kind of action to, you know, fix it for the future. It's pretty bleak.
I mean, that seems very much in keeping with everything we've heard coming out of Florida. But I'm sorry to hear all of that, and I hope the rest of your family's all right, Dr. Gus.
Yeah, everyone's vaccinated and kind of surviving okay. So in that sense, I'm pretty lucky. Before I go, I also wanted to say, Matt Lex tweet about Bolsonaro going broke here in the U.S. Actually, right-wing Brazilian WhatsApp. So he's reaching far. It is pretty impressive.
Oh my God, no way. Well, I retweeted that as soon as I saw you put that out. That was pretty hilarious, Matt.
Yeah, I tweeted out. There's a news story. Bolsonaro promised that if Lula wins the upcoming elections in the first round, he will leave Brazil. It says I'm going to the United States, and I said he'll be broke from U.S. medical bills before half a year. And I didn't notice. Like I got in the office today. I'm like, it had like something like 6,000.
Oh my
likes.
God, 10.5K likes right now.
Yeah, scroll down a little bit, Bradley. It's going.
It has 1 like for every time Bolsonaro has gotten COVID in the past 2 years.
Oh, well, so now you're probably getting a bunch of interesting replies.
That's all right. How do you say welcome in Portuguese?
Do you know, Dr. Gus?
Dr. Gus?
Well, I actually don't know. I just have friends. I speak Spanish. So,
okay, gotcha.
I'm just in a friend. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Have a good one, and thanks for the call.
Wait, don't let me go. One last thing.
Oh, okay. I thaught you said last thing that time.
Yeah, I know. I just.
No, I just mean I didn't mean to hang up on you. Keep going.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So just you guys were talking about Nate Silver. I just wanted to say, like Brandon said, I'm not a real doctor. I'm a veterinarian. I went to school, animal medicine. Then I did a master's in clinical trial stuff. Then I'm doing a PhD in molecular biology, infectious disease with bacteria. I've taken, I don't know, like 8 or 9 classes, graduate level classes in epidemiology, disease modeling, all that stuff with infectious disease. And I am not qualified to say very much at all about COVID, about what's going to happen with the disease, anything to do with the epidemiology of the disease. So if I'm not qualified, Nate Silver is fucking delusional. Don't pay attention to what that guy says. He was already stretching himself when he jumped into politics. Right now, he's, I don't know, in a different world. He needs to go back to work.
Yeah. I don't want to be misunderstood. I want to say, you're better than a doctor. You're a friend of the show. But I mean, Nate Silver is the kind of expert that a country full of people who can't calculate 20% of $100 tip in their head kind of get when it's like the illusion of math and the illusion of science become inextricably linked to this desire to have a predictive model for the universe, where that this place that science went in the past 30 years, where it's like, okay, we're not doing descriptive sociology or descriptive psychology. The big focus is on how do we use like this stuff to predict the future in more pop psychology, pop like sociology, pop like statistics way. And our society just is not like as interested in teaching people statistics or math or any of that stuff enough for it to be anything other than like a divergence from like what we should actually be talking about and how we should be talking about it, to be like, it's similar to like sports betting. No offense, Emma. But I mean, to that point, I think, and also to the point, to your point, and the point of the earlier bashful caller from Chicago, we're watching our infrastructure across the board fail us, and there is just an entire goal of the institutions that have been in charge of maintaining that infrastructure, making sure teachers are, schools are staffed, making sure that, there's like HVAC systems, that schools have, the ability to maintain, have a small student to teacher ratio, not to mention our hospitals, like nurses, number of rural hospitals closing. There's just been like this concerted effort to disguise how far that was degrading over the past 30, 40 years. And now that we need all that stuff, the question of where it is has to be like papered over with various, methods. Like, okay, Republicans will tell you there is no COVID, so why do you need a hospital? Like, you're not sick, go back to work. And Democrats and their aligned punditry, they might not like the ultimate, like, Nate Silvers and the people complaining about schools closing, they might not like the ultimate effect of their politics, but they love having monetized the flaws. And so the more frustrating part is you have people who are like, I want schools to be open right now. I haven't supported anything over the past 30 years that would be possible to make schools be open, but I would like to have this conversation about why schools should be open in a manner that does not address those past 30 years or my positions up until this point, which make that impossible. And so we just, we find ourselves going back and forth with a system that will, like you said, in 5 years, when we still haven't built the infrastructure and we're still living under this illusion that like, well, when there's a real big problem, we'll get things together. This doesn't count though. We'll just see that like a real big problem, it's never going to arrive. We just have like an illusion that we're going to be able to, we have an illusion, or we've maintained an illusion that we're able to deal with mass scale problems and tragedy in a coherent way because we just ignore like the fact that they never get solved.
Appreciate the call, Dr. Gus.
Thanks for taking my call. Appreciate it, guys.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. All right, let's do another clip here. I had a few that I wanted to get to. Okay, here we go. So Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, she went on Eric Bolling's show to talk about these two pieces of legislation that are the South Dakota legislature is attempting to pass right now. And of course, it has to do with critical race theory. Here she is explaining it, and she basically says that she wants to teach kids not to protest and not to challenge the system. I was shocked by the frankness.
Students from Action Civics, tell us what's going on with that bill.
Well, that will specifically say that our kids in our K-12 system, our public school systems, will not be able to be taught or taken out to actively protest and lobby, that they won't be taught to be involved and used in an activist agenda. So it's a bill that will ensure that we don't see happening what we've seen in other places around the country, and we're doing it in combination with another bill that we're introducing that will ensure that we don't have racism taught in our curriculum and in our schools as well.
Yeah, let's expand on that a little bit. How are you going to do that, Governor? I read and I looked through the State of the State speech. Fantastic. So you specifically say you don't want critical race theory taught in your schools. How are you going to be able to do that?
We're going to ensure that our kids learn a true and honest history of the United States of America and the state of South Dakota. So we are currently in the middle of redoing our education standards. Those will be directing some of the content and curriculum that will be taught in our school districts. But this state law will enforce that. It will say that within our school systems, the kids can't be taught anything that would divide people.
So they're going to ban teaching the civil rights movement in schools, and then also ban Black History Month and replace it with like American History Month, probably.
Well, teaching racism. That's part of how they also just completely warp the meaning of these things so that they have power anymore.
The part that
race theory equals racism now.
Yeah, I mean, that part was, they've been working on that for the past few months. But the part that really jumped out to me was how they're going to specifically ban teaching like activism to children, that like children shouldn't be part of activist movements because, for some reason they shouldn't be tools or whatever, even though like the right wing's whole thing is telling you that you're killing babies when you get an abortion. So it doesn't, again, make any sense. But I think that there is an interesting through line there, because part of why our infrastructure is failing and people are confused about why it's happening is because we've been promoting a theory of change in this country, through education, our like curriculum, through our like political media that like enforces that, change happens when good people in government decide that it's time for change, and that all of the, activist movements that you've heard about in the past all happened very peacefully, very, respectfully. They presented a list of demands to the government in, A6 paper. And then the government, who was just being made aware of this, just decided to do the right thing. And so you shouldn't have to worry about like marching in the streets. You shouldn't worry about activism. You just got to get out there and vote. Now, obviously, Republicans don't believe in voting either. But, it speaks to the kind of gridlock we have. Like they're just rapidly removing from people's like lexicon and toolkit of like how societal change works, like the, most basic form of it, which is like you have to do direct action because otherwise the government just ignores you. And that goes across the political spectrum.
It's also designed to undermine labor. The whole, go ahead, Matt. You want to say something?
What Kristi Noem wants and what other Republicans like her want is genocide denial. That's what she's after. So here's a story from the Argus Leader. Census erasure across the U.S. states. States are reckoning with the need for Indigenous education, and this is the start of it. In South Dakota, Indigenous education advocates are calling for Governor Kristi Noem and other government officials to resign after more than a dozen references to the Ashetishakowin, that's the Lakota, Dakota, etc. peoples, were stripped from the proposed social studies standards before they were released to the public last month. Like the Indigenous folks put together an entire proposal, and Noem just nixed it, and that's all. Like that's critical race theory. If Indigenous people have any input into the story of a certain state, that's critical race theory to these people. And I think.
And then just to point out the Osheti-Sakoan thing, right? Like this also to undermine activism and say that activism is evil, basically, and teach that for them not to be activists. It also undermines any Indigenous people standing up for their rights with pipelines or land rights or sovereignty.
With the Ashetishakowin, I think the Dakota Access Pipeline protests were the first time in decades that all of the families of tribes were together in one place protesting something. That is a threat to the way that these states do business, and that's why this stuff. It's not just like wokeness for the sake of ideas, right? This like understanding our place in history and the world that we've inherited, and frankly, like through genocide and things and expulsions and just denial of political rights to folks. Like that's the future Noem wants to maintain.
I mean, that's also part of why it's very difficult to take like the two conversations that are happening at the same time in Republicans and like mainstream circles very seriously about like kids need to be in school, but also like we're not going to teach them in Dakota about Native Americans or like Indigenous people. It's like, okay, well, you know what? Fuck that. It's like, what are they learning then? Like what do they need to be in school so bad for if they can't even learn about history? Our math and sciences programs are terrible in this country too. It's like, it's obviously just for the sake of having the businesses run. And, you can put any number of like single parents in the media to like argue that it's, the backbone of American society, but we don't even care enough about these kids to give them a real education. So like, I mean, honestly, it's another version of like our kids are depressed, our kids are alienated, just like our adults are. And instead of addressing why our kids might be depressed and alienated at any structural level, let's just shuttle them back into like the classrooms where we don't have to hear about it. And so, like, to even like engage in the conversation about kids needing to be in school because it's enriching, while like simultaneously pretending like the conversations we have about education are not like just the lowest common denominator stuff. It's like, it's really hard. Like, it's really hard to respect that conversation.
Yep. Yeah.
It's despicable.
It's despicable. All right, let's take one more call. This is going to be the final call of the day, I think. Calling from an 843 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is David from South Carolina.
David from South Carolina. What's on your mind?
Woo, finally got on when you three were on. This is awesome.
Nice.
I have a question for each of you, starting with Emma. When are you going to do a sports radio show?
I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I've thought about this a good amount, right? It is my hobby, but I have an issue with not being able to moderate myself. So that is why I'm so obsessive about it. And I worry that making a show about it would make it work. So I'm that's a little bit Matt emphatically says yes here.
No, I mean, I'm very jealous of people who are at sports media. I think it's the greatest job in the world. Yeah. But like, I do think that the thing of making it your side project is like you're turning more of your. This is why I don't do a whole lot of Twitch streaming anymore. Is because like I'm turning a hobby into something I'm monetizing. It sucks, right? Because all of a sudden it becomes like clocking in instead of like relaxing. Yeah.
Right. So the point is, I've considered it, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. So.
Have you thought of any possible names for your sports show?
No.
I got one for you.
What?
The M Zone.
That's not bad. I mean, Bradley writes ESVN. No, but it would be. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's sort of right. But also the VIG would be good because that's a gambling term.
Oh, I didn't know that. There you go. I mean, you got it right there. And here you go once again.
Yeah,
falling into the gambling area of this all.
Once I have a show, maybe for politics, maybe it'll still be the VIG anyway.
What does VIG mean?
It actually it's not a sports gambling term, I think, but it's the I'm blanking.
VIG or vigorish is the cut or amount charged by a sports book for taking a bet, also known as juice in slang terms. Sports book only collects.
But it is a sports book then thing. I didn't know that.
This is nominative determinism. This is why Emma is a gambler. It's in the name.
Okay, then what's the question for everybody?
Even that right there was a sports thing. It's in the name, isn't that like a video game, sports video game thing?
It mattered.
Yeah.
In the name.
In the game is.
Oh, in the game.
EA Sports.
EA Sports. It's in the name. That's it, right? Yeah. Okay.
It's in the game.
It's in the game. It's in the game.
I don't play sports or sports games.
Well, then I hope this is not a sports question for.
I play sports simulators.
I play a Football Manager simulator 2022 for a higher caliber of challenge, but.
So what was the other question?
Okay, so my next question is for Brandon. Have you ever considered going by the moniker of the Swole Socialist?
I mean, I think everyone goes by that moniker. It's not very creative, but I mean, if I come up with good names all the time. People have complained that they can't find me online though, but like I didn't think that. I mean, I'm obviously not anonymous, but I was gonna say I just thought we were supposed to change our username every few days. Like it was like a trend.
I've never once done that. Change my username.
I'm not good at them anymore. I used to be pretty good.
You could just change it to pretty swole lefty, right? Instead of pretty bad lefty, right? Yeah.
I collectivize those gains.
All right, then what's your Bender question?
My Bender question is, Matt, do you think it's possible for a wrestling worker co-op to ever stand up?
I think so. I don't know how would that look or who would lead the charge there, but it's definitely possible. I would say the talent is probably more progressive than it's ever been. There's no Hulk Hogan's, as far as I know. There's some people who give me those vibes in terms of being like company men who would easily go to Vince or somebody and blow their cover. The Undertaker or John Cena, for example. But I don't know. I don't know. I think it's definitely doable and possible. It'd probably have to start with the smaller companies and then be as, grow to the point where like the talent in the bigger companies would be like, hey, what the hell? We want this too. What I think is actually the more sensible thing, and I don't know why this doesn't happen, is SAG really should step up and make a campaign to get all these people. We're talking hundreds of people who wrestle on pro wrestlers who are on television, and say they should be covered under SAG. They're on a TV show on network television every week. How is this not considered? How should they not be covered by SAG?
No, he should be classified as actors, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. Yeah, they should be. I mean, I don't know if like stunt coordinators have their own union or something, but I mean, they are performers in the sense where they act and they play roles and storylines. So, I mean, to me, the SAG could really step up and do something. And I think that would be it would get the eyeballs they need. It would get a lot of press, and there would be an institution there to support them. I mean, there are wrestlers who are part of SAG. John Cena, Mick Foley, any wrestler who's ever been in a movie or a TV show, they have to join SAG. So the idea that like you can't just do that for everyone that's on the TV show that they wrestle on is just baffling to me.
All right. Well, appreciate the call.
That was all my questions. I appreciate you guys. You guys keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
I need like a professional, like ripped person union, like a union for like just people who make money from being like just swole.
That would be awesome.
We'll call it swag.
I'm sorry.
I don't know the acronym.
That is the final call of the day. I am hanging up. We will do maybe one more clip and then do some IMs, and then we're gonna get out of here. How's that sound, guys?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Sounds good. Okay. Oh,
what do we want to do? What do we want to do here?
I think we got to do Candace Owens here.
All right, let's do it.
Let me just find this really quickly. Number 13. All right. Hold on one sec. Sorry. Okay, gotcha. So Candace Owens, who, I mean, in my opinion, is very untalented, but she is shameless, so that gets her a lot of clicks and a lot of play, and the right finds her useful. She is now peddling an insane conspiracy theory about the death of beloved comedic actor Bob Saget. You have to hear this and see it to believe it.
So, am I a conspiracy theorist or am I Nostradamus? The answer is neither. I'm just not on Big Pharma's payroll, and I refuse to peddle in their lies.
Ma'am, this
and
is
so
Wendy's.
To that end, today, I'm going to point out another truth, and it will likely be deemed a conspiracy theory until it's not.
What?
There are too many healthy individuals like Bob Saget, who we know have received their vaccinations, who are dropping dead suddenly and unexpectedly with no further explanation. Healthy athletes, young students in their physical prime, the majority of them males, dropping suddenly and unexpectedly in the middle of games from heart issues.
Suddenly and
What we know for a fact is that these people are being mandated to take the vaccine. And we know for a fact that these vaccines come with a warning that they bring about myocarditis. But the media is once again gaslighting the
First of all,
so does COVID.
Yeah, COVID actually has it's more likely that you are going to experience myocarditis if you contract COVID, and myocarditis is caused by other diseases or like viruses like the flu.
Yeah, it's a common response to viral infection.
But continue, because apparently Bob Saget, she has intimate knowledge that he was mandated to take the vaccine. So
the young, healthy soccer player Bob Saget. I mean, no offense to Bob Saget, but like.
I mean, he was in his 60s. Continue.
Mandated to take the vaccine. And we know for a fact that these vaccines come with a warning that they bring about myocarditis. But the media is once again gaslighting the public, pretending that to even take notice of this very alarming trend is a conspiracy. The problem isn't that healthy men are dying. The problem is that you're noticing it. Where are the fact checkers? All of this to say that I don't know why a healthy man who is in the middle of a comedy tour suddenly and unexpectedly drops dead in his hotel room. But I do know that we have a right to ask the question. All of us do. In fact, when the entire world has suddenly and unexpectedly been prescribed an injection that we don't need, it is not only our right to ask questions, but also our right to demand answers.
Yes.
I will say it's actually not
suspicious.
Right. I would say it's actually not suspicious that someone would be found dead in their hotel room during a comedy tour. The same way it's not suspicious when a pro wrestler in their like 40s or 50s drops dead in their hotel room while they're on tour. These lifestyles are very rigorous in different ways. There are drug issues. I'm not saying specifically for anyone, but there are drug issues. There are just the wear and tear of life on the road. I'm sure not everybody's able to eat as healthy when they're on the road for 10, 20, 30 years. There are a number of reasons why someone who is constantly on the road touring would have health issues early on in life. We've seen it in all the various professions that require people to be constantly traveling.
Yeah, there's no drug. I just want to make clear there were seemingly no drugs found or anything with Bob Saget specifically. Right. But he was in his 60s, and you know what's interesting to me too is how she's kind of, this is such a QAnon adjacent type of thinking. Everything's connected because like this celebrity that you know and love is probably connected to this deep conspiracy.
Yeah, Kobe had stuff on the Clintons.
A victim of it, right? I mean, that's like, yeah, Kobe killed the Clintons or whatever the conspiracy is. Everyone that you have a parasocial relationship with is connected to the larger conspiracy that you're also afraid of. Here's some magical thinking for you from Candace Owens.
Well, I mean, that's where like the far right and also conspiracy theories or conspiracy theorists of this type overlap quite a bit, because like their main evidence for most things is that like it's their experiences and they're very like their own ability to think things through. And so one of their biggest tools is like confusing correlation for causation and not really being able to tell the difference between that and what is like an example of a larger trend versus some shit that you just found, like, some just like a random example of something or an anomalous event that occurred. And so like, they're doing the same thing with this, like, oh, people are dying of mysterious causes at the same time people are taking a new vaccine. Therefore, those two things that are happening at the same time must inherently be linked, or, she's heavily implying that they're linked. And they do the same thing with immigration, and the sort of general degradation of the material conditions that most people see in America as a result of neoliberalism and, the funneling of wealth upwards. They just do things like say, oh, you see, there are a lot more brown people in your neighborhood and you've noticed the quality of life has gone down. Those two things must be related. And, it's a causal relationship, not the, correlative relationship, like we've said, but, with immigration, it's like there's a middle ground of like people are moving to the global north from the global south because we're extracting wealth from there. So it's forcing migration. So if you've noticed more people coming to America, it's because of that. And for the case of this, it's like, everyone's got the COVID vaccine, who is planning to get it at this point. So theoretically, as long as they're a mysterious death, they're going to happen with people who've gotten the vaccine. And so,
we're going to know in a few weeks, once the autopsy is conducted, how Bob Saget died. So this conspiracy theory has a shelf life, but it doesn't matter. She has to just throw it out there. And like, I'm sure what?
I'm not to actually you here, but I'm going to guess, and I have no proof here, but I'm going to guess that from knowing what we know, It's possibly could be a heart attack, which unfortunately actually will not give this conspiracy theory a shelf life. It will just add to the idea that, the vaccines caused a heart attack in Bob Saget. So I think this has a really long shelf life, this conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and also even if you could demonstrably put evidence in front of their face that they could understand, I suppose there's an autopsy report that they can say would be, fudged. It's like conspiracies are about the way they make you feel. Like it's about the way this prediction makes her listeners feel at this time, that she's being brave enough to, broach this truth, that they're being like savvy enough to listen to like these taboo ideas. The fact that she's wrong, and then it's also really a dumb logical train to follow, or at least an incomplete one that doesn't really have any evidence to it, is not important. It's important that they know that they're able to find this unified like train of thought together, and they're able to complete the ideas that she's starting out there without fully, making her claim that this is being caused by the vaccines.
Is she like on the run from the misinformation police? Is she like, is she going to be arrested for all this stuff, or is this? She actually allowed the right to make these questions. Like, I think
she's going to get arrested for thought crimes by the, the 1984 police or whatever they say.
She's been on a real push lately about the amount of soccer, aka football, in the rest of the world, players who have had heart issues over the past year or two. That's the big one, that soccer players all over the world are in their like 20s and early 30s are suddenly completely healthy, top of their field, and they drop dead from heart attacks. But then you look at the rates of this happening in soccer players, and apparently it's a sport that puts a lot of pressure on one's heart, and the rates aren't that out of the ordinary when you look at years before. And also, I think it also skews it because soccer is the most popular sport in the entire world, which means more people play soccer than anywhere else. I'm going to assume that there's more professional soccer players than any other sport due to that as well. So when you hear that there's so many soccer players, something's happening to so many soccer players, because there's so many of them. I mean, where are these same like basketball players or football players, where's the huge amounts of them just dropping dead from heart issues? And you're just not seeing it. I think it's happening in soccer because it's a sport that's hard on the heart. And then B, there's so many people who are professional soccer players compared to other sports. So there's a larger audience for this to happen to. Nothing COVID related.
I bet you there's more conservative radio hosts that have died from COVID than soccer players who have died from heart attacks. But there's a lot more soccer players. And also, she has the right, as clearly she's not being arrested for raising those questions, to ask those questions. I have the right, and I would say obligation, to ask if Bob Saget would have had that heart attack if he wasn't friends with Dave Rubin. And I wonder if that, I think I have the obligation to continue asking that question if Dave Rubin caused a Bob Saget's
I didn't know he
death.
was. That is depressing to learn that information. Thank you for that. With that said,
Bob Saget was friends with everyone in that scene, whether they were famous comedians. Like, it seems like everyone in that world had something nice to say. So I don't think you could judge him too much on that one. He just seemed like he was a guy.
I'm just medically concerned.
A lot of people are jumping around the obvious conclusion that like Bob Saget was hit with the heart attack gun by the CIA for having information as to like prove that Trump won the election. This is another Clinton op, another person added to the Clinton body count, and a lot of people, including Candace Owens, are afraid to speak truth to power, and you hate to see it.
Empty Vessel Mansion, autopsy has been done. He had a heart attack or stroke. Okay, gotcha. United Coalition of Motivation for Brandon says, it might surprise nobody that YouTube has approximately 900,000 videos to help you stretch out. I recommend a yoga channel called Boho Beautiful. It has a ton of videos that will put you in positions that will literally make you cry from tension release. Do it. Your back needs it. Okay. I'm literally gonna write that down now, because
this is all great advice. Yeah, for like people like you who are fine right now, or people or when I'm fine, but I can't do any of this stuff right now. I'm stuck. I can't.
Are we allowed to make anti-Australian comments, or is that like a type of bigotry that has not been accepted yet, or has been?
We did a bunch of pro-Australian comments yesterday on the show, so I think it kind of is a wash. If you want to go ahead,
I was gonna say, as long as the channel doesn't have any Australian yogis leading the stretches, because I find it hard to concentrate with the Australian accent telling me to do things.
It's not sing-songy, I will say.
I love sing-songy. That's like more Irish. And I buy like a good Irish bro.
That's my favorite accent, I gotta say. I mean, maybe that sounds. I do love a Scottish or an Irish accent. They're beautiful. That movie Brooklyn, it's like makes me want to cry every time they speak. Anyway, Andrew and Olympia, Brandon, is there anyone? Is there anywhere someone who uses neither iTunes or Spotify or afford a Patreon subscription find current episodes of the Discord via RSS?
If you don't use iTunes or Spotify and you don't have the Patreon, SoundCloud has them, but I might not have uploaded them anything to that recently, but that will change.
If you search it in like something like Pocket Casts, which I use, and Overcast is the Apple one, I'm pretty sure it will show.
I'm really bad at technology, folks. I know it might be hard to, take that in because I'm like on a screen right now, but I'm actually not very good at it. But if you have a problem and you DM me directly with it, I can usually work through it with you. But I think SoundCloud, yeah, because SoundCloud links to everything. So if you just like search it on like that's how I used to find the Majority Report and stuff. Like if you just search it on your like preferred podcast app, it should be available through that. It's also on Stitcher, I think.
Gotcha. All right, 5 more. John from John F. McDropout. Solidarity to a majority of Alberta unions currently demanding a lockout to stem the rising tide of COVID infections. Jason Kenney keeps killing us and the healthcare system is falling apart, but at least our dying unions can manage to raise what's left of their voices to protect workers. Stay safe, friends. Yes, solidarity, of course. And solidarity with the 8,400 Kroger's workers in Colorado right now who are striking. And as well, I believe, I should have headlined this, but Bessemer needs our support as well. The union, Amazon, they are going to do another vote in a few weeks on a unionization effort. So solidarity with them as well.
Every worker is a hero. Never forget that. And, I won't add any caveats.
Okay. I can't tell what the joke is.
No joke. I'm being earnest. It's just, my voice just sounds like this.
Okay.
Teachers, heroes. Nurses, heroes. If you Kroger employees, heroes. Cops, not heroes.
Yeah, well.
Firefighters is mixed.
It is mixed.
It is mixed, yeah.
Rob from Dedham. Every time I see or hear Mike Lindell, I think of the Rick James / Chappelle clip. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. Yeah, unrelated. Because
that is our future president / warden you're talking about.
President / warden. Shane from Canada. One of the people the Gray Zone cited in their All of You Are Imperialist article wrote a book on BreadTube. One of the other books was that same person has written is called Satan at the Fountainhead, the Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis, which I'm sure is not an insane book.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. Bourbon Socialist. I have a great Sunset Lake CBD story. I bought several bags of their smalls, and they accidentally sent me a 1/4 ounce bag when I ordered a whole zip. I notified them by the end of the day that they had a package coming my way. I notified them, and by the end of the day, I had a package coming my way. Not only did they give me the ounce that I ordered, they gave me an extra ounce of great CBD. Give these people your business. Yes, they're an excellent company.
Oh, are we talking about drugs, or is that something else?
We can't say, just like the non-psychoactive.
Okay. Oh, okay. I get it.
For some reason, it's not.
So not drugs. So okay.
Not drugs.
We're not talking about drugs.
We are not talking about drugs. NJ Canfield, Rogan is the best example of this Jimmy Dore dynamic. A lot of us in the MMA jiu-jitsu community and people who like stand-up had to distance ourselves from him and denounce him at some point. It's a process and not easy for everyone to admit that people change for better or worse. Yes, agreed. Illuminati kids, Binder's right. I have to come out and say it. Sam's pivot to having a beard is a complete betrayal, and the audience it attracts is problematic.
Sam's pivot is why I'm here. I'm just slowly usurp things back to the way I remember them as when I was in college.
And the final I am of the day, funniest home conspiracies. Bob Saget's assassination comes at no surprise to me. Anyone who has seen him in The Aristocrats knows he was a scathing critic of the elites. Good I am to end on. Matt, Brandon, and Bradley, thank you guys so much for all your help today. We will see you all tomorrow for Casual Friday.
Take
See
care.
ya.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth